Jordan. You guys know what time it is. That's such a terrible intro, but I'm Eric Lindquist. Hello and welcome to the MLB Deeper Dive presented by One Jock Market. I'm very excited to get this thing going. We're going to run it back here. Hopefully a little bit more success. Thanks, Trevor Story. Than we had a little bit this morning, but either way, maybe Adam's doing a little bit better than I am, but at Ship My Money DFS, my guy with the head nod right off the bat. That's not a good sign. Adam, how you doing, my dude?
Not doing so good. Losing like all my early slate money.
Good.
Allergies were bad today, so I took a Benadryl. So I feel like I'm on drugs on top of losing all my money. It's going to be a little bit rougher than usual, I think.
Drugs would be more fun than whatever I just experienced with that second Trevor Story home run. You can survive one. You cannot survive two.
Yeah, that makes it pretty tough.
It's really awful. So thanks, Didi Gregorius. If we could just flip their days, if the Trevor Story could be the one to hit 2 home runs yesterday, I wouldn't be so upset. And then give me the Didi homer today. But that's generally how it goes. But either way, we're getting ready to talk some baseball as everybody's getting in here. Hello to all the usual crew. I'm Eric Lindquist. You know me. You know Adam. You like us, I think, for the most part, or a little bit. Hit that like button, because that's the nicest way to show appreciation for the free content we're putting in front of the paywall every single day for you. That is the thing that keeps the lights on here at Awesemo. So hit that like button. Definitely hit the subscribe button too, and hit the notification bell. That way, you know whenever we have content going live, and we have a ton of content. We got done with the MMA show here in the afternoon. Those guys do an amazing job with that every single time. We've got a Hall of Fame game. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'll be on a live before lock tonight. Coming up at 7:15 p.m. Eastern time with Matt Gajewski talking the Hall of Fame game. Stoked for that. Very, very excited. But of course, we've got 6 games. We've got a lot of baseball to get to. I want to keep it a little bit brief here at the top, outside of just letting you know that you also need to check out Betting You, the new podcast that Matt Gajewski, my co-host for this evening, and him and Ben Rossa are putting out for college football season. They're talking you through everything. Heisman winners, potential national title winners, which MAC teams to be betting on, everything there. Make sure you guys have those episodes loaded in your queue. Go to Apple, go to Spotify, load those up and be ready to rock. But otherwise, we're going to talk baseball now. You ready to go, Adam?
Yep. Someone in YouTube chat said Red Sox big letdown today. Truer words have never been spoken.
Oh my God, I just truly want to drop kick them in the face, but there's not a whole lot you could do. I was going back and forth with you a little bit. I like Tariq Skubal. He was popping up in everything for me, and I didn't like it and manually changed it. Maybe don't manually change stuff. I don't know. That's just what happens in MLB DFS, though. You have places where you see leverage and they fail, and you don't get like a top award for best made lineups compared to the field, right, Adam?
Yeah, exactly. You still have to get lucky and actually have things work out after you make those lineups.
Yeah, it's just disgusting because game theory wise, man, I'm winning all the money here this week. Whatever. I'm excited to rock here. Let's get talking about the slate here. We got 6 games to get to on this main one. I think it's a very intriguing slate. I bet you probably feel the same. Everybody's got an implied total between 9 and 9.5, or it's literally 9 or 9.5. Starting with Seattle plus 175 on the road, taking on the Yankees here in this spot. Tyler Anderson on the bump here, the major acquisition for the Seattle Mariners making their postseason run. I don't know what to really think about that. And then Nestor Cortez, who I like, but the pitch count just never kind of seems to get there in a way where we can really be looking at him. Talk to me about pitchers in this one.
Yeah, Cortez is just a little bit more expensive than I would really like to get to. He did throw 79 pitches his last time out. He threw 74 pitches 3 appearances ago. So that's good to see. And his numbers overall are okay. He's got a 22.4% strikeout percentage this year, only a 4% walk percentage. I think that he's okay, but not somebody that I'm really going to get too much of at this salary. Tyler Anderson on the other side, just a really, really dangerous spot for him. He's someone that I think probably has a little bit more talent than people give him credit for, because he did spend a while in Colorado when he first came up, and then he's had some injuries since then. But he's still not a pitcher that I'm going to be getting with any level of confidence against the Yankees, a team that has, a lot of power top to bottom in their lineup. For the season, Tyler Anderson's allowed a 196 expected ISO to righties with a 21% strikeout percentage. He's allowed basically no power to lefties so far, but he's only struck out 16%. So it's a really, really tough spot for him. If I have to go to one of these two, I think I lean towards Cortez, but I don't expect to get much exposure to either one.
Yeah, it's not a great spot to be going to pitching, especially 75 degrees, 70% humidity, wind blowing out a little bit. And you have a Yankees lineup that is basically on steroids. So that's not ideal. But both these southpaws, if you're playing large field stuff, it's a 6-gamer. You only have 12 total pitchers. And so there is some viability to kind of mixing and matching a little bit, or you just jam the chalk like Bundy today, because that's also going to work out every single time, apparently, and without fail. F my life. Here we go. Seattle on this side here, pulling up the top stacks tool right now. Yeah, you're going to probably be getting leverage on any team here that has an implied 4-run total. The teams you want to go to, it seems like, are pretty evident, but it's also pretty evident here in the top stack potential. You're getting 3 points of leverage, though, only 2.5% total ownership. I think they should be getting a little bit better than that. I do like Cortez as a pitcher, but I think some of the righties here in an upgraded ballpark, certainly an upgrade for ballpark, might be viable. What do you think about going to some Mariners here?
Yeah, and the other thing with the Mariners is right now we actually have 27% ownership projected for Nestor Cortez, which on the one hand, I think seems pretty high, but on the other hand, it is a 6-game slate and the pitching on this slate isn't great. And then you also just don't have much to like in that price range. So maybe he does get a decent amount of ownership here. If that's going to be the case, then that's another argument in favor of Seattle. Like you said, it is a positive park shift for them. They do have some power. Mitch Haniger has power. Ty France has power. Kyle Seager hits lefties well. Abraham Toro is a switch hitter. Torrens and Murphy both have some power, especially Murphy for a catcher. So it is an okay spot. I think a lot of my Seattle, ultimately, I think my Seattle exposure mostly comes down to Nestor Cortez's projected ownership. But even if you ignore Cortez from the equation, 5.5% top stack percentage for Seattle, only 2.5% ownership. Compare that to teams around them like Kansas City and Seattle that are getting, or St. Louis rather, that are getting twice as much ownership. And Seattle does just kind of grade out as a pretty good tournament stack, I think.
Yeah, I think they do too. And I like going to some of these pieces for sure. Toro's been pretty darn good. And I thought he was pretty serviceable there for Houston. I guess they just were waiting to get Diaz back and they were going to unload him for a bag of potato chips. So why not? Ty France there also in the 3-hole today. Kyle Seager, I never really mind involving against lefties. But on the Yankee side, that's really where everybody's looking. And it's not going to be any surprise. They've burned me the last 2 days because they keep going off. But what I find interesting is we right now have them for underneath 10% ownership share. So there's actually some leverage to be had going to this team at the moment. I don't know if that's going to necessarily ring true. I suppose there are some pitchers on the top end we want to get to in Valdez and Gray that we'll talk about a little bit later. But if this holds true right now, I mean, the Yankees would be a great spot. Do you think you'll be going to some Yankees bats today?
Yeah, if it holds how it is right now, then definitely. And what you're seeing is that, the Yankees are still getting some ownership, but Houston's in a very good spot against Griffin Jacks. Cincinnati's in a very good spot at home against Trevor Crow, and they are just cheaper offenses. They're easier to get to. There's not a lot of really good pitching to pay down for on this slate. So I think it's just going to be people are going to kind of flock to those teams more than they're going to be able to get to the Yankees because the Yankees are relatively expensive. Giancarlo Stanton is only $4,300, but other than that, everyone in their top 5 hitters is at least $5,100. Gleyber Torres is $4,400 batting 6th. Then you get some salary relief at the bottom of the order, but it's just going to be a more expensive team to stack. I think I will have more Yankees today than I've had in a while.
Probably the same here. I do have to say, though, it's so hard for me to figure out what to do because what you want to do is you want to play the same guys that everybody else wants to play. I really don't enjoy playing Gleyber Torres. I really don't enjoy playing Odor or Davis. Higashioka has always been a decent enough catcher here. I don't know. It's just against Tyler Anderson, as you said, he can be a little bit better probably than what I was even alluding to. He limits hard contact, but this is not your typical team. And he's a fly ball pitcher. This could be kind of a disaster for him.
Yeah, I think it's a good spot for the Yankees. Like, it's probably not as good a spot for the Yankees as it is for Houston or for Cincinnati, but it's still a good spot. And most importantly, they just project to get less ownership than those teams.
All righty. Anything else from this game for you?
No.
All righty, let's go to Cleveland, plus 170 at Toronto, 9.5 total runs. I always play a ton of Toronto, but however, Toronto, still positive leverage. It's basically anything that isn't Cincinnati or Houston is positive leverage at the moment. That would be awesome because that would make this slate very clear cut for me to just jam Yankees and Blue Jays because they're probably the 2 best American League offenses, and why not? So looking at this, though, you got Tristan Mckenzie. We know the kind of boom bust option this human being can be. I mean, a crazy high strikeout rate, but then gets a little bit wild, walks dudes, gives up hard contact. It's absurd. And this is not the team you're looking at going and picking on whatsoever. But in a large field GPP, 28.5% K percentage here on the season. Is there some kind of viability with just 12 pitchers in play to go to Mckenzie?
I think so, just because of the upside. Like, he doesn't project well. It's a tough matchup against Toronto. He has walk issues. We did see him walk 3 guys in his last start against Chicago. So that broke that stretch of 1 walk per appearance that we had seen from him. He's just a really, really volatile pitcher, but he's getting virtually no ownership here. 2.6% projected ownership on DraftKings. I don't think I get to a lot of him, just because, I do think projections still matter. It's just you need to keep in mind the range of outcomes. And Mckenzie does have a very high ceiling, but it's a very difficult matchup against Toronto. They don't even strike out that much for a team that has the power that they do. Nope. It's a favorable hitter's park. So I really wish Mckenzie were like 7,400. I think it would be a lot easier to justify going to him. But at 8,400, I think there's some merit in the largest field tournaments, just because of the extremely low ownership and the fact that he has the second highest strikeout percentage on this slate. But a 15.5% walk percentage, 2.11 home runs per 9, xFIP approaching 5, facing this Blue Jays team, I don't think I'm going to get a lot.
All right. Yeah, I was about to just back you up with the point about Toronto. They don't strike out a lot. 21.2% K percentage against righties for the season, second lowest in baseball, and then a 198 ISO, second highest in baseball. It's a dangerous spot. But again, in large field stuff, if you're trying to compete with 10,000 plus entries in something, I think there's probably viability to getting to anybody with a 25% plus K percentage, but you're not getting a discount on him either. He's 8,400. So it's like, what are you supposed to do with that?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like to compare it to players in that price range, because again, I mentioned that even though the ceiling is really high, the median projection is pretty low for the salary. He projects around like 2 to 3 points lower than Ross Stripling does at a similar price point. He projects a couple points worse than Nestor Cortez, who is cheaper. So it's, I think, again, to get to him, you'll definitely have to be doing something that, using randomness in Fantasy Cruncher, capping your pitching exposures so that it filters out to some other guys like Mckenzie. And that's why the ownership is going to be so low. But again, it's just like, I think I'll be able to find some lower owned hitter spots that I get to before I start getting to a lot of Mckenzie.
All right, let's talk offenses, because that seems like a lot more fun with both of these guys. I guess the Cleveland side, you don't have Jose Ramirez in the lineup. So wowzer, maybe that's kind of the major upgrade that you get here. Bobby Bradley batting cleanup here. Everybody's super cheap here on the Cleveland side, and they've got the third lowest top stack percentage. Or no, that's not true. They're middle of the pack here. I had it grouped differently. 7.6% ownership share. So, I mean, they're like middle of the pack, but I don't know, unless I'm just jamming in top pitchers here. How are you handling Cleveland? Because it feels like for me, Franmil Reyes, Bobby Bradley, or maybe Bradley Zimmer, and move on with your life.
Yeah, it's so tough to get to Cleveland when Jose Ramirez isn't in the lineup. That being said, it is a good park to hit in. Ross Stripling is going to get some ownership at 22%. I think that's well deserved, but you certainly can make the leverage argument here just to get a relatively low owned stack against Stripling. But the problem too is that Cleveland's actually projected for a decent amount of ownership. Last night, I thought they were a pretty good tournament option because Steven Matz was getting some ownership and basically nobody was on Cleveland. I think Aston Mercado was like 1%. All these guys were really, really low owned. That's not likely to be the case today because you have a $2,100 Zimmer leading off. You have 3K Bradley hitting cleanup. Ramirez and Mercado are 2,200 and 2K respectively hitting 5-6. The only guy in the top 6, the only guy in the lineup above $3,600 is Franmil Reyes at 4,700. There's only 3 hitters above $2,200. So this is just a team that the players are going to fit into lineups really, really easily, and it's going to make them be a little bit higher owned than you probably like.
Yeah, and you're not getting a crazy amount of leverage. Like if I was getting a little bit more leverage here in this spot, or if Stripling was going to be popular, that might give me a little bit more viability to be like, all right, I'll take some shots here in this Cleveland offense. But as it stands, I mean, Franmil Reyes sticks out for me. He sticks out almost every single slate because he just murders baseballs in a meaningful way. 54.2% hard hit percentage and a 532 expected slugging there on the old StatCast. I like looking at that, and I think he fits in well. Bobby Bradley, I guess, but he just doesn't hit the ball as hard as what I was expecting here. Looking at him, 38.8% hard hit percentage, just not a very enticing team. But you know what is an enticing baseball team to stack up? The Toronto Blue Jays have some guys who hit baseballs pretty hard, I would say.
Yeah, one or two. And you have a pitcher. I mean, there's just so much blow up potential here for McKenzie. When you talk about the walk rate, like he can get behind guys, put guys on base, and things can get ugly really, really hurt, really quickly. For the season, the strikeout numbers have been great, but a 230 expected ISO to right-handed hitters, not really what you want to see going up against the Blue Jays in Toronto. He's a lot of 183 actual ISO to lefties, though the expected ISO is lower at 136. There's a lot of right-handed power that can do damage here. I think that goes without saying. And Toronto's ownership is likely to be relatively low for the same reason that the Yankees are. They're in a good spot. I don't think anyone's arguing the upside that they have, but it's just going to be much easier for people to go to these cheap teams that are in good spots like Cincinnati and Houston than it is to pay very expensive salaries for Toronto. You can use guys like Corey Dickerson, Lourdes Gurriel are nice salary savers hitting 5th and 6th, but 1 through 4, the cheapest guy in there is Marcus Semien at 5K. You have Vlad Guerrero at 6,200 on DraftKings. It's a really expensive team. So I think that you get some ownership going to Toronto bats individually, but I think the full stack is probably pretty low owned because you're going to have to sacrifice elsewhere in your lineup.
So to Teoscar Hernandez, that's the one guy that we're kind of missing in that grouping. So Corey Dickerson, Lourdes Gurriel, definitely, they definitely bring down the overall expensiveness, if that's the right word I'm looking for, of the entire thing. That's goes without saying here. But favorite bat, not named Franmil Reyes from Cleveland.
Bobby Bradley.
Okay, and favorite bat if you're going one off and you can't fit an entire Toronto team.
Am I allowed to say Vlad?
Yes, you're allowed. Absolutely. There's
okay. Actually, I'll take that back. I think it's probably Bo Bichette just because of the position. Like one thing I've kind of just noticed in general, even yesterday when I was really high on Toronto, I actually was underweight on Vladimir Guerrero individually because he's just always, pretty popular. And it was just like, there's a million good first basemen I can play. Whereas it's more difficult to get to some of the other positions.
Right. And there's power at the rest of the position, whereas there's not a lot of power at that position, unless, of course, Trevor Story's on the slate, and then he will break it, and then you will be sad. Whatever. We're not going to talk about the early slate. What I am going to talk about is the fact that you should hit the like button. You should hit the subscribe button, and you should be checking out all of the things that we have going here at Awesemo. Check out our free content today, too. MLB player rankings, completely free. Also free, very important, NFL projections for the Hall of Fame game tonight. I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but Matt Gajewski and I are going to be doing a live before lock show leading up to the Hall of Fame game between the Cowboys and the Steelers. Football's back. Preseason football, which we haven't had for 2 years. If you have not played preseason football, it can be crazy profitable by one, just playing dudes who are actually going to see the field, and two, playing the guys and identifying the ones who can get the most playing time. And it sounds pretty straightforward. It is not. It is very confusing. It's convoluted, but that's what we're going to break down for you. We have the best mind in the industry, the guy, Matt Gajewski, college football into NFL. He'll break down the rookies, the guys making their introductions for it. If you're doing preseason football, you need to be following him. You also need to be checking out the fantasy football and the Awesemo odds channels in the pinned tweet on the pinned message on YouTube chat right now. Check out both of those spots for YouTube. It cannot get any better than that. I promise you, we're putting out content constantly. We're leading up to NFL. It will be here before you know it. Be prepared, be ready to go, but especially be prepared and ready to go tonight because there is a lot of money to be won by focusing in on that. Oh, and play both defenses. Anywho, we're going to move ourselves back to baseball. Once again, Pittsburgh plus 212 going up against Cincinnati. I alluded to it earlier as well. Cincinnati, insane ownership that we're seeing on them because they are facing one Will Cruel. If anybody picks up on, Game of Thrones reference, it's fine. Yeah, Cruel. I just like saying that. 446 expected slugging, 345 ex-WOBA here on the season, 401 Will Crow. He might be in some trouble here in this ballpark. Would you agree?
Yeah, pretty brutal spot for him going into Cincinnati. Implied run total for the Reds is approaching 6. Crow, not really any sort of prospect. He's almost 27 years old. Fangraphs has him as the number 30 prospect in the Pirates organization. Not ranked in terms of MLB, obviously. For the season, he has struck out 20.8% of hitters in 16 appearances, 15 starts. He's allowed 1.88 home runs per 9, 4.85 xFIP. Looking at his splits, 249 expected ISO to righties, 123 to lefties. So it's another guy that changeup actually seems to be a decent pitch for him, and he's done an okay job. He's allowed a 185 actual ISO to lefties, but the expected ISO is lower. The thing about that is that this park the actual ISO is most likely going to be higher than the expected ISO just because it's a favorable park for hitters. So it sets up as a very, very good spot for the Reds. They are priced up in some spots, like Jesse Winker and Joey Votto are no longer free squares. They're still very good plays, but they are expensive. But then elsewhere, you have Nick Castellanos at 3,700. That's a joke of a price. Tyler Stevenson gives you power at catcher. Kyle Farmer's cheap at shortstop at 3,400. So overall, it's still a relatively inexpensive team. You also have a cheap Tyler Naquin and Eugenio Suarez. So at least this isn't like a month ago or whatever when Jesse Winker was like 4K flat in amazing matchups. But overall, still a team that's going to be pretty easy to get to in a really good spot.
How do you deal with a hitter like Naquin, who we almost know for sure with Aquino sitting there as a righty? If they bring in a lefty, you're probably going to see Aquino come in there. Do you change anything in your projections for a guy, especially because he's in the 7 hole? He's had a couple games where he's batted a little bit higher, and I haven't been as concerned about it. But how do you treat somebody on a slate like this where you know that entire team's going to be popular and the pinch hit risk is so high for him?
I mean, I think it's baked into projections for him because at least any good projection system is going to pay attention to what teams pinch hit frequently and who's likely to be pinch hit for. So I think it does knock his projection down a little bit. So it'll show up there. And it's also baked into his price somewhat. Like if Tyler Naquin were getting 4 at bats every game, he'd be more expensive than $2,800. So it's one of those where I don't do a whole lot in the course of 150 lineups to knock down whatever Tyler Naquin I'm getting, because I think it is pretty much covered in elsewhere in my process. But it is something where if I'm playing one lineup or I'm making a couple lineups by hand and there's a tiebreaker for me, I would lean towards probably going somewhere else.
Yeah, and for me, it's just because I'm looking at his ownership. He's 20% projected owned right now, and that just seems like a large number to be investing in a guy that you're maybe getting 3 at bats at most, 2 for sure, maybe, but it feels kind of iffy to me. So I didn't know if you had any kind of a lean with the way that you treat somebody who's that popular, if you just don't play them, if you're willing to chop it in half, or kind of how you dealt with that.
He's down to 12 in our latest update on DraftKings.
Oh, okay. So I'm looking at 215, so 8 minutes. He just got downgraded even further in 8 minutes. All right, cool. I love that we're on top of stuff like that. That's why I love working at Awesemo, because they answer your questions for you if you just would hit refresh, but I didn't. Nick Castellanos in the 3 hole. He's back. First game for him since July 19th. I like getting to him for sure at 3,700. That is just a broken price, but going to be very, very popular. But if I'm looking for a dude to kind of throw in or as like a 2-man just to kind of put it together, him and Winker together at the top of this are great. On the other side, let's talk Sonny Gray. So we got to talk a little bit of the pitching here for this young man. 32.2% hard hit percentage on the season, 29% K percentage. I mean, those are lovely numbers and all. We've had some brutal outings here also in the middle of that. The St. Louis one just completely sunk my battleship. Of course, that was enjoyable. The Mets outing then rebounded nicely, 25.9 there, 7 Ks, got the ground balls back, which was good. After giving up 7 fly balls against St. Louis, got back to 9 there against the Mets and only 2 fly balls. None of those home runs, the 3 that he gave up to St. Louis, still so tilting. But Sonny Gray really sticks out for me as the guy that I really want to prioritize on this slate. How about you?
Yeah, same for me. And he's getting a ton of ownership, but I think it's deserved as well. We have him at 57.5% projected ownership on DraftKings, 33.9% on FanDuel. I think with, on FanDuel, with it being the one pitcher site, that's probably a little bit overowned. On DraftKings, I think it's pretty reasonable because if you get away from him, it's just, there's not a whole lot else to feel confident about here. The way I think I probably end up approaching it, and again, I haven't made lineups yet, but across 150 lineups, I think I probably end up overweight or at least around the field on Sonny Gray. But then I could see getting overweight on the Pirates as well, and kind of leveraging against Sonny Gray that way instead of taking some weird stand where I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to play a bunch more of some really bad pitchers, but I'm also not going to play the Pirates really. And so I want Sonny Gray not to do well, but also the Pirates not to win the slate. To me, it just makes more sense to be overweight on both sides.
I love that. And that's the beautiful thing about MLB DFS, at least theoretically, because you have that opportunity and you can be on the better side of it with both teams, or you could have more leverage on it in both directions for sure, no matter what the outcome is. Well, as long as it's not just split down the middle, gives up 2 earned, only 6 Ks, and then you're sad. I don't know, pretty much every slate this week for me. Looking at Pittsburgh side though, is there a bat or two Hoy Park's 2K leading off here. And, Brian Reynolds, I think always sticks out for me as probably the best batter to go to out of this lineup as a one-off. But is there anybody else that you're kind of meaningfully that you would be targeting if you're only making like in a 20 max and you're trying to put together a Pittsburgh stack? How are you putting it together?
So I think Brian Reynolds is like the number one guy you're targeting here because he's legitimately good. Brian Hayes gives you a ceiling. Gregory Polanco is too cheap at 2,400. So I think if I'm just like singling out a 3 max, those are the guys that I want. But then you do get really cheap bats. With Hoy Park leading off, he did lose shortstop eligibility. You still have Kevin Newman at shortstop batting second. John Nagowski, 2,200 batting fifth. Stallings has decent power for a catcher. So it's not, it's a bad lineup, don't get me wrong, but it's not the Nats. It's not, if they have a good game, it wouldn't be like the worst lineup we've ever seen have a good game. But individually, I think it's Brian Reynolds, number one, like just clear number one, followed by Brian Hayes and Polanco for me.
All righty. And then Cincinnati side favorite. We've talked about them at length. It's hard to go wrong. For me, Nate Quinn, I'm taking down a little bit. It's weird seeing Suarez in the 8 hole, that's for sure. But anybody that you really want to prioritize out of there?
You mentioned Castellanos. I think he's the one guy that really jumps out as a clear cash play, and he's a good tournament play too, as long as you're different elsewhere. But getting around 30% ownership, I think he is one of the best plays on the slate. Someone you should most likely have in cash at 3,700. Outside of that, I think that Stevenson and Farmer, of course, Winker's good, Votto's good, but Stevenson and Farmer, because of their positions at catcher and shortstop, I think that they're going to be a little bit more valuable.
Somebody just said, what's the point of cheap bats for the slate? No top end pitching. Well, I will say the pitchers that I like the most are the 2 most expensive pitchers. I think that there's something to be said about that. And tell me from the rest of these group of guys where you really feel confident. Tucson is going to be the guy that I'm going to go to, and we'll talk about him in the last game here of the evening. But it's just going to be a tough spot to get to. Anything else from this game?
Nope.
All righty. Let's do it. Minnesota plus 205 here at Houston, 9 total runs in this one. We'll save the 2 here for last. I think the Atlanta game, has a lot of interesting talking points for sure on both sides of it here. But Minnesota plus 205 at Houston. Framber Valdez, if you're not going to be going up to Sonny Gray, or if you want to couple them together, I don't mind it. Framber Valdez is a guy, top pitcher tool, 24.4%. We actually have Nestor Cortez 0.1 higher, and then Ross Stripling 0.3 higher. Those are both negligible, but ownership, I guess, is going more towards Valdez. Looking at this Minnesota lineup, Josh Donaldson's back in there, but no Max Kepler, I guess, supposing because it's left on left, and you're getting guys like Ref Snyder and Sano and guys who can definitely add some Ks to the mix there a little bit. But what do you think the outlook is here for one Framber Valdez in this spot?
I think it's a pretty good spot for Valdez. It is a watered down Minnesota lineup. You have the roof closed in Houston, which is nice. And Valdez is just a good pitcher in terms of preventing runs. He doesn't strike out as many guys as you would typically like for someone at his price point. Only 21.5% for the season. Walk rate's a little bit higher than you would like, but 0.88 home runs per 9, 3.66 xFIP this season. And with it only being a 6-game slate and there being a lot of questionable pitching, the fact that Valdez is 9,900 isn't as much of an issue, not to mention there are a lot of cheap bats on a lot of different teams. So there's a lot of ways you can get to Valdez. I think he does have a little bit of added strikeout upside, like you were saying, with this Minnesota lineup. There are just some guys in there, even though they're right-handed, that do strike out quite a bit. He does have pretty drastic splits in terms of the strikeout numbers, 20.4% against righties, 29.7 against lefties, but he's done a good job limiting power to both sides of the plate. Only a 0.097 expected ISO to right-handed hitters this year. I think Gray has the higher ceiling just because his strikeout stuff's better and he also has a very good matchup. But I think that both guys project similarly, and I think they're the top 2 pitchers on the slate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for me as well, Griffin Jacks here on the other side, 5.8K for him. He's your cheapest pitcher here on the slate. He's been stretched out. He had 83 pitches his last outing. 6.41 ERA, not good. 1.35 whip, not good either here. But considering you got rid of Berrios here, Jax is probably going to be in there. They're going to see what he's capable of doing. What's his outlook for you going forward?
Pulling it up now, going from memory, I don't think he was someone I was very impressed with the last time he pitched. Yeah, and he's almost 27. He's Minnesota's 36th ranked prospect on FanGraphs. He's made 7 starts at AAA this year, 38 total innings, 22% strikeout percentage. Did a very good job of limiting power, only 0.47 home runs per 9. 40.4% ground ball percentage doesn't stand out as anything crazy. Infield fly ball percentage doesn't seem crazy. So probably just gives up more power in the major leagues than he did at AAA. That's something that, wouldn't be surprising. And we've seen it so far, 3 starts, 7 total games in the majors, 2.36 home runs per 9 for Griffin Jacks. He so far has allowed a 303 expected ISO to righties, 0.073 to lefties in a very limited sample, not getting strikeouts as you would expect. So I don't think this is someone that should be any good. I think the Astros clearly have the advantage here.
And they clearly have ownership too. So I'm going to hit refresh here just in case, because you said we had gotten another run here. And Houston, 18.2% ownership share, only a top stack potential of 12.6. As you said, he limited a lot of power. And if we're looking for some stacks, considering you have the Yankees and Toronto on the slate that you're getting positive leverage on, we know how much power exists in those lineups. Is Houston still a team that you're willing to roll out here, knowing that they're going to be this owned and knowing that depending on the way this lineup shakes out, which I believe it's the only lineup that we're sitting and waiting on here, I'm assuming because we'll see if Gurriel ends up going or not. But what are you going to be doing with Houston today?
I think I'll end up treating them the same way I treat Cincinnati, where as long as the rest of my lineup is relatively low owned, I'll mix in some of those guys, but I'd expect to be under the field in terms of full Houston stacks. And in most cases, individual players as well. Again, it comes back to total lineup ownership, but you just have, looking at the top stack tool right now, Cincinnati and Houston as like the slight favorites to be the top stacks, but you're talking like 13% for Cincinnati to almost 12% for the Yankees, but twice as much ownership going to Cincinnati, 1.8x the ownership going to Houston. There's just no real reason for me to be looking to get over on those two teams when I can still mix in some of their hitters and just hope that, one of the other 8 teams on the slate or even if you want to just narrow it down to like Chicago, Yankees, Toronto, or something like that, just still hoping that somebody else in that range just happens to be the highest scoring team.
And then on the Minnesota side, and I really do like the Minnesota stack just in terms of Polanco, Donaldson, Garver, and then maybe Sano in there as well. Super boom bust. We know he can K a zillion times. We also know that he has a crazy amount of power. Hasn't always come to fruition here at the plate. And Valdez seems like he does not do very well against strikeout pitchers. He's got to be playing some of those weaker guys. I think you've just made such a good point with that over the last couple of shows we've done together, where some of these guys who have crazy high K rates, and Sano on the season, 35.2%, that's ridiculously bad. And you go up against a pitcher in Valdez, I guess 21.5% K rate, not so good. So never mind. This might be a spot where I'm looking a little bit more at Minnesota than I was thinking before the show. What do you think?
I have a hard time getting there. Okay. The reason being that I do like it when you get guys that strike out and have a lot of power that face a pitcher that doesn't strike guys out. The thing that I think is important, though, is some pitchers that don't get a lot of strikeouts are extremely good at dictating what happens when the ball's put in play. Valdez is one of those guys. He has a 71.3% ground ball percentage this year. Like, just absolutely insane number. To put that into context, the next highest ground ball percentage of anybody pitching today, this slate, the early slate, the standalone Mets game, the next highest is Dallas Keuchel at 54.7%. And Dallas Keuchel is like known as a very good ground ball pitcher. Alex Wood is at 54%. Senzatel is at 54%. 71.3% for Framber Valdez. Only a 13.9% line drive percentage as well. That is the lowest of anybody except Taylor Hearn. And Hearn spent most of the year as a reliever. The reason that's important, not that line drives themselves turn into home runs, but typically line drives are just going to be very, very hard hit balls. And if you're giving up a lot of line drives, you're going to also give up a lot of power because you're just giving up rockets off the bat. The next lowest out of any pitcher, so like Griffin Jacks is next, but he's barely pitched. Will Crow is at 18%. Alex Wood's at 18%. So you're talking like 4 points lower on line drive percentage and almost 20 points higher on ground ball percentage for Framber Valdez. 26.6% hard hit percentage this year is incredibly low as well. Again, out of anybody that's spent most of the year in the majors, easily the lowest on the slate. Sonny Gray is next at 29.7%. So the point being here, I do think that there's a good chance guys like Josh Donaldson and Miguel Sano hit the ball, but they're probably just going to hit it where Framber Valdez wants them to hit it.
Yeah, 4.4% barrel percentage too. So he keeps that down. Man, negative 6.4 degree average launch angle. That's useful. I would say that's useful, Lottie, for sure. All right. Anything from the Minnesota side, though, that you might want to be taking a shot on whatsoever? I mean, Mitch Garver's at a catcher spot. That usually works out. And Donaldson can probably be pretty good against any lefty in any matchup. But anything that sticks out to you that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, I mean, like individually, there is still power here, but overall, I think this is probably my least the team and the spot that's least interesting to me because they have a similar top stack percentage as Pittsburgh, but I think the ceiling for Pittsburgh is just a little bit higher because the ballpark's better. And then also you're getting more ownership going to Sonny Gray. So if your low probability team actually does well, you're beating, 50% of the field instead of 35 or 40. And then, again, just Valdez does such a good job. Like there's just no way you can point to one guy on Minnesota and say, like, I think this is a good spot for him to homer. You can say, Josh Donaldson has power, Miguel Sano has power, but you can't ignore that Framber Valdez is allowing an ISO to right-handed hitters this year of 127 with an expected ISO below 100, and that they're just pounding the ball into the ground constantly. So I think it's a really, really difficult team for me to get to.
Yeah, somebody's going to hit a home run. It's going to be like a stinger 2-iron to left field kind of a thing.
Right.
Like it's just got to be. And then you have the Crawford boxes there, so it's pretty hard to hit it over that damn thing. It's a short porch there, but it's harder to hit a line drive. It's not the Green Monster or anything, but still, I digress. Let's go on over to the Houston side here. Of course, we just talked about how much ownership they're getting here. We're waiting on the Gurriel here. Kyle Tucker, I think I've just unanimously just claimed as mine. Like Kyle Tucker is my dude that I play every single slate, and I play him in a ridiculous, meaningful way every slate. He's in the 6 hole, which I love. If you were to move up to cleanup or to like the 3 hole, I would probably have less interest because I think that ownership jumps through the moon. But it seems like out of the rest of the bats here, he always goes a little bit underowned. Here today, 19% in the 6 hole. Maybe still gets a little bit underneath that, but Brantley for sure. And Yordan Alvarez is a little bit more expensive, but he usually gets a little bit more ownership. So Kyle Tucker, I've always identified as like my dude, but who is kind of your dude from this Houston offense today?
I was going to point out Tucker too, because it's kind of interesting when you think about it in the context of the slate also, because Houston is getting a lot of ownership. Tucker's getting 18%, which is relatively high, but we already talked about Nick Castellanos in that Cleveland or Cincinnati game getting like 28% ownership at 3,700. Even though Tucker's popular, even that, if you have a team where, you need to save a little bit in terms of ownership, even going to Kyle Tucker, he's in a phenomenal spot. He's a really high upside guy. Like I think that both Tucker and Castellanos probably should end up in your cash lineups, but the ownership relative to Castellanos was kind of interesting to me at that price point where you don't even have to go too far off the board. You can play probably the second best hitter in that price range and still get an ownership discount with Kyle Tucker. Michael Brantley's insanely cheap. I like the spot for Alvarez, who I think relative to his power is too cheap. The team as a whole is just underpriced. Like, why is Yuli Gurriel ever the second highest priced guy on this team?
So dumb. Because he's a contact hitter. How about that?
I actually thought there was a decent chance because, like, I don't pay. It's not like I pay attention to like actual stats, really. Like, like counting stats.
That's great to know. Let's throw that in. Let's put that on a business card.
You could tell me Yuli Gurriel had hit like 22 home runs this year, and I'd be like, oh wow, that's cool. Like, he still doesn't project that well he doesn't project as a power hitter because he never has been. But I was kind of expecting for you to be like, he has 33 home runs. And be like, oh, well, that would be why. But
Kyle Tucker has 21. I know that.
What'd you say?
Kyle Tucker has 21. I know that.
Yeah, that's not really surprising. Gurriel has 12.
He does, yeah.
So
12?
Yeah, I mean, he's hitting 324, 12 home runs. I'm not saying he's a bad hitter. It's more so like, why is he more expensive than Yordan Alvarez?
I have no idea. And I mean, Michael Brantley is like never expensive on this team whatsoever. I mean, and he's leading the American League. Well, he's leading all of baseball in batting average. So not that batting average needs to be your baseline for everything you do, but he gets the ball in play. And the thing that if I want to expand on why I love Kyle Tucker so much, let me count the ways. He doesn't strike out. He's underneath. He's like at a 16% K percentage, but then he also doesn't walk. 8.4% walk percentage. That means he's up there swinging, and he's got a 573 expected slugging, which is just a dumb number to have out of a 6-hole hitter. That just tells you how rich Houston is at the top of their lineup. Always feels like he comes in underowned. So going forward, maybe today isn't the best example because there's ownership going up and down this entire lineup. But a lot of days, I'm telling you, Kyle Tucker, just because he's somebody who profiles as somebody who gets the ball in play constantly, and he's not going up there and walking, because I don't want guys that are going up there walking. Sure, it's great if I'm stacking up a team, but my one-offs, I want them going up there, and I want them swinging lumber, and I want them hitting the ball hard and far, and Kyle Tucker does that.
I'll throw another one out there. Kyle Tucker steals bases, too. Griffin Jacks in 26 innings in the majors has already allowed 5 stolen bases.
That's useful. That's a number we can do something with. And if you just go by sprint speed, Chas McCormick, a possibility of being in that lineup right now. He's projected 8th, both with us and with other sites, and looking around at some of that. He's the guy that I've got in right now. Well, again, we'll see if Gurriel ends up in there and how that would affect other pieces of it. But yeah, I love Kyle Tucker. I love Aledmys Diaz at 2.7K, putting him in the mix. Came out of the gate really, really hot here. They were willing to part with Abraham Toro. A lot of it is the multi-positional element that Aledmys Diaz brings to that team. And then, if he's in the 7 hole, he'll probably come in a little bit under-owned comparatively to the rest of the guys. So be on the lookout for it. But I thought that this team, on the top end, yeah, you've got the power that exists with, not Altuve. He doesn't necessarily hit the ball as hard as you would expect out of a guy that usually garners quite a bit of ownership, but we know he can be a useful piece for sure at the top end. And Yuli Gurriel doesn't project out well for me either. I just like the back half of this Houston team. Is that something that I can identify and call as mine?
Yeah, you can have. I'll take Tucker. You can have Diaz, McCormick, Maldonado.
I want to say F you again, but it didn't go well last time. People still bring it up to this day. So there is that. Anything else from this game at all?
No.
Okay, cool. We are sponsored today by Jock Market. And if you guys haven't checked out Jock Market, you definitely need to. They have turned fantasy sports into a stock exchange. So forget about waiting until the end of the game to make money. Jock Market allows you to buy and sell shares in real time for real money with guaranteed payouts at the end of each night. They have markets for absolutely every sport. When NBA, NHL come back, you'll be able to get in there. NFL is just around the corner. Get set for that. PGA is going right now. Hopefully you invested in Harris English. That chalk donkey human being just went out and went nuts today. Of course he did. But if you have him on Jock Market, you're in a really good place for sure. And then the big one, MLB, obviously the thing we're talking about every single day. Get in there, invest in players, invest in some 2-man stacks. See if Kyle Tucker is coming in cheaper than Yordan Alvarez. That would be a spot where I would definitely want to be invested, considering the ridiculousness. Yeah, it's 2 lineup spots there, but at a fraction of the cost, I'm sure Kyle Tucker will be cheaper, especially than some of these Cincinnati guys. And so look at investing in some of those stocks and kind of making it a piece of your portfolio every single day. Going to sites like Jock Market and taking advantage of the bonus codes like they have. $50 bonus code using the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, for your first deposit over there is how you sustain a bankroll. It's also how you build a bankroll. And playing on these other sites, especially Jock Market, can give you an edge. If you're watching these shows every single day, I promise you, you have a leg up on the competition. It's an exclusive offer for that $50 bonus as well. So check it out using promo code Awesemo. And thank you so much to Jock Market. They've been a loyal sponsor of the Deeper Dive, of the Live Before Lock show. And we just love being affiliated with them. A bunch of great dudes that we've talked to about the NBA product, talked about the MLB product, and really enjoy playing over there. And I think you will too. Let's get ourselves. We got 2 to go here, 17 minutes. We've got all the time in the world. Kansas City Royals plus 177 here, going up against the White Sox, 9.5 total runs. You alluded to it earlier. Dallas Keuchel, the second best ground ball pitcher on this slate, going up against Daniel Lynch here. Neither of these guys stand out as super intriguing fantasy options for me. I don't know if you see anything differently in this spot, but Daniel Lynch actually projecting out really well in our top 2 pitcher percentage, 15.2% and only 4% ownership. Could this be the low-owned guy that we can rely on tonight?
Yes and no.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting given the slate because just talent-wise, he is one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. He's the Royals' number 3 prospect. Fangraphs has him as the number 77 overall prospect. He's posted good numbers at AAA this year. Overall, he has made 11 starts, 12 total appearances, 57 innings pitched. He struck out 24% of hitters, 7% walk percentage. He has had home run issues, 1.58 home runs per 9, but pretty decent numbers at AAA. He was absolutely god-awful at the beginning of the season in a few major league starts. Went back to AAA, came back, and has made 2 starts since. He had a really good start against Detroit where he went 8 innings, struck out 4, got 15 ground balls. And then he had a rough start against Toronto. He still managed to go 6 innings, gave up 3 runs. So not, like a horrible start, but only 6 DraftKings points, threw 107 pitches though. So you have a $6,300 guy who is at least a highly rated prospect and is fully stretched out. That's the good. The bad is that he's facing a very dangerous White Sox team that has a 5.7 implied run total. We've not seen really anything at the major league level that makes us confident that Daniel Lynch is here now. Like he might be good in a year or 2. So far, he hasn't been, even if he has gotten a little bit better since he came back up. So there's a ton of risk, but there's just not much pitching to pay down for that you're going to feel good about. Like Will Crow is 6,900. Can you make the case for him because the Reds are popular? Sure. But is it a case where it's like, oh, I think he does well? Absolutely not. Same goes for Griffin Jacks against Houston. So it's a dangerous spot for Lynch, but I think he is at least the most talented out of the Will Crow, Griffin Jacks, Daniel Lynch, like sub 7K guys.
How much Aaron Nola did you have on the early slate?
75, 80%.
Yeah, I had 100, and he just gave up a 3-run bomb. He's now given up 5 earned. So thanks, Josh Bell. That was fun. We're having fun today.
Can't really go backwards when you're already losing like everything you have in play.
Maybe you have some Josh Bell in your life?
I wanted to, but I don't think I actually do.
Okay. Yeah, I ended up with a little bit of him, but let me just say, not enough of him because we are in trouble here on this early slate. But again, that's why God invented 2 slates here on Thursdays so that we can give a little and we can take a little on the back end. That's what we're looking at here. Going to the Dallas Keuchel side of this, I never played Dallas Keuchel. He's probably my least favorite pitcher, but we only have 12 of them total here on this slate, and there's got to be viability at least for anybody like that. But I mean, it's showing up in our top 2 pitcher percentage, 10.8% chance of him finishing in that top 2 number, and obviously going to be coming in with more ownership than that, specifically more ownership than Daniel Lynch. Dallas Keuchel going up against this KC team that we know has righty power, especially at the top of that lineup. What are you doing with him today?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the ownership's coming in around where it should be on him. I don't really anticipate getting overweight. I probably will have more Keuchel today than I normally do, but that's not really saying anything. For the season, he's been okay. 4.4 xFIP, 1.49 home runs per 9 is a lot. 14.5% strikeout percentage is really bad. The only thing that he has still been good at is getting ground balls. He's not nearly as good as he used to be. He's lost some velocity. You've seen some issues with command, but does still get a lot of ground balls. Right-handed hitters in particular, 213 expected ISO against him, only a 13.2% strikeout percentage this season. If Jorge Soler were still on the Royals, he'd be a phenomenal play, but he's not. But you are getting a discount on Whit Merrifield at 4,200. Normally he's more expensive. Salvi Perez at 4,600. I think is a very good catcher option. Hunter Dozier, certainly one of these guys that swings and misses a ton, but isn't likely to do that against Keuchel. Again, Keuchel is typically good at getting ground balls, but he does give up homers. He makes enough mistakes, whereas someone like Valdez just is in his prime and doesn't really do that. So I do think there's spots you can get to on Kansas City. Whit Merrifield really stands out, as does Salvi Perez.
God, didn't KC win the $18 yesterday?
Yes, they did.
It's just the dumbest thing ever. Or the $10. I guess it was a $10 yesterday, but that was like 0.5% ownership here. Looking at the top stack potential, 5.5%, 5.9% ownership share. They're not going under-owned. They're not going overlooked. I mean, part of that is no Lucas Giolito on the mound. That will suppress ownership in any spot, but I digress. Looking at the White Sox here, let's do that because they're definitely the more intriguing of the 2 stacks, coming in a little bit under-owned, just slightly here. But now you're finally getting guys like Eloy Jimenez is closer to where he should be priced at 4.9K. Jose Abreu 5.6K and Tim Anderson 5.8K. I love getting to some of these more expensive spots where people might be a little bit apprehensive to get to those guys specifically. A lot easier to fit in Vaughan, Engel as well, who's been really good of late. What are you doing with the White Sox?
Yeah, I mean, they're still getting ownership. Like Tim Anderson at 16.5%, Abreu at 14%. I was hoping those would be a little bit lower, but I think that I'll probably just end up around the field on them. Like, I still think the way things look right now, I think the Yankees, I think Toronto, I think those guys look a little bit, or those teams rather, look a little bit better than the White Sox do. But I still think the White Sox are better to get to in tournaments than Cincinnati and Houston, especially in your larger field stuff. So I think I get to the White Sox more than those teams, but I still think I'm prioritizing like paying up for Toronto, paying up for the Yankees before I'm prioritizing paying up for the White Sox. I do think it's a pretty good spot. Again, Lynch just hasn't really shown the ability to get major league hitters out consistently yet. You do have a lot of right-handed power and an entirely right-handed lineup, whether it be actual righties or switch hitters. There's not a lefty in this lineup for the White Sox. So it is a very good spot. It's a high upside spot, but again, I think just, getting a little bit more ownership right now than the Yankees or especially the Blue Jays.
Agreed. And looking at the KC team, Whit Merrifield, you said probably your favorite bat from that side.
Yeah, him and Salvador Perez.
Oh yeah, Sal Perez every time. Smokes baseballs, catcher position, absolutely. And then going to the White Sox side, is there something that you would do? For me, it's always Eloy Jimenez, especially he's still under 5K. But anybody that really sticks out for you?
not relative to their ownership. Like the guys that are getting ownership are the guys that I think should get ownership. Mm-hmm. Andrew Vaughn's probably the most mispriced guy here. Like Abreu and Tim Anderson, as good as they are priced where they should be. Andrew Vaughan at 2,900. I mean, this is one of the, he was like the second or third overall pick a few years ago, was considered the most polished hitter in that draft. Quickly he's made it to the majors and has had, some success this year. I think he's just underpriced compared to a lot of these guys on Chicago.
And tied for highest expected slugging there, 448 with Jose Abreu, highest on the team. Usually that's a good thing to be tied with Jose Abreu in things, especially when you're a lot cheaper than him as well. All right, we got 9 minutes. What's up?
We just got the Astros lineup. It is just absolute garbage.
Wait, let's take a looky here.
Altuve, McCormick hitting second, Brantley, Alvarez, Diaz, Tucker, Maldonado, Robel Garcia, Jason Castro.
Okay, well, that's enjoyable. So you're getting no Correa. He's getting the day off. You're getting no Gurriel. That's not good as well. Martin Maldonado batting seventh should be apparent that that's never a good thing. That's insanity. Okay, so what does this do to the overall lookup of this team? I mean, Robel Garcia's 2K. I guess you could maybe put him into the pairing, but I really don't have a lot of interest in the Maldonado, Castro, Chase, or anything at catcher position. I think there's better places to go, but how do you kind of treat this stack? Because now you're getting two cheapies in McCormick and Brantley. I'm guaranteeing you they end up crazy popular around with Alvarez and Aledmys Diaz. Man, this is not even close to anything that I wanted to see.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because you definitely are taking some good hitters out of the lineup, but you're also making the lineup a lot less expensive with McCormick hitting second, with Aledmys Diaz hitting fifth. Diaz, not the worst hitter since 29 or this year, against right-handed pitching. He has a 349 expected WOBA, 147 expected ISO at 2,700 batting fifth. I don't mind him as a value option. So I think the top stack percentage on Houston probably comes down, and you see it increase a little bit for teams like Cincinnati, the White Sox, the Yankees, the Blue Jays. I'm not sure how much the ownership comes down though, because they just became a lot easier to get to.
That's kind of what I was concerned about. That's why I'm saying I didn't want to see it, because now Kyle Tucker there's no way that Kyle Tucker is going to not be 20% plus, or that you're not going to get Jordan Alvarez. They're going to be crazy high owned, especially in this spot. Okay, well, there's really not a whole lot else to say there. I kind of do not enjoy that, but we got one more to go here. We've got 7 minutes here. And then of course, coming up right after us, make sure you stick around. Same stream. You don't have to go anywhere. We've got Greg Ehrenberg, Terry McBride, my two dudes. Absolutely love those guys. I know you guys do too. Stick around, hang out with them. They'll be leading you guys all the way up to lock of this lovely six gamer. And let's finish it out here. My boy Tuki Tucson, who introduced, just this cutter that decided to not cut apparently last time out and got absolutely obliterated facing the St. Louis team. We've got minus 115 for Atlanta, 9 total runs here in the St. Louis side. Wade LeBlanc starting over there. They're lovely additions of J.A. Happ and Wade LeBlanc at the deadline. That'll do a lot of things for you here. Tuki Tucson, though, starting to give up a lot of that hard contact that kind of has plagued him throughout. We know the K stuff can be there, even in this limited sample this season, up to 28%. That's close to where he's been for his entire career. But yeah, as I said, he introduced that sinker. He's throwing that 58% of the time. He had only been throwing it around 5% of the time in 2020. Got absolutely lit up. But as the boomer bust option here, I never really mind going to him. And now we're seeing the ownership, though, at 31%. It's tough to stomach, but I think you got to give him a little bit of respect just because of what those Ks can be if he's limiting walks. How are you handling Tuki in this spot?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to still get to him here for a couple of reasons. Even though he is getting ownership, that's to be expected on a slate of this size. But we've talked a lot about how there's not a lot of high upside cheap pitching. We spent time talking about Daniel Lynch, for example. But Tuki Tucson, he's 500 less than Cortez. He's 1,400 less than Stripling. He's way less expensive than Valdez and Sonny Gray. And I think he's just way more talented than anyone around him in salary. He has struck out. Oh, I don't have it sorted about strikeouts anymore. He has one of the highest strikeout percentages on the slate. For the season, he's at 28.2%, 5.6% walk percentage. That's through his 3 starts in the majors. But he also at one point was a top pitching prospect. FanGraphs still has him as Atlanta's number 8 prospect, number 57 overall. He's at AAA this season in 4 starts, he has struck out a ton of guys with a 35% strikeout percentage. The walks have still been there. So I think I mentioned it before. I do expect his walk rate to increase as he makes more starts in the majors. But the point here is that he does still have very good strikeout stuff. Even in that last start against Milwaukee, where he ended up not doing well, he had a 12.7% swinging strike percentage, which is good. And he started that game out pretty well. He was really popular on that slate. And I was underweight on him. And I remember thinking like, man, I wish I had more. He looks really, really good. And then he just kind of got lit up in 1 or 2 innings, and that was it. But the stuff is still good. He's going to face a right-handed heavy Cardinals lineup. Plus he gets to face a pitcher. The Cardinals aren't a terrible offense, but they're not one that I'm really afraid to take guys against either. So far in his limited, his 3 starts in the majors, Tucson has struck out 31% of right-handed hitters. If you go back to 2018, he has a 27.4% strikeout percentage against righties, which is, very good. You mentioned that sinker. He's throwing it 65% of the time, only an 8.7% swinging strike percentage on that pitch, but then he's getting a lot of swings and misses on his splitter and his curveball. I just think he's got a lot more upside than really anyone priced around him.
Yeah, the sinker is made to just basically try to get in the strike zone and get ahead in count so that he can set up his breaking stuff. At least that's the appearance, having watched those starts. I went back because, after his first start, it was somebody that I'm like, maybe I should have been pulling the trigger on him because we know historically what those strikeouts can be. So I definitely pulled the trigger on him. It was like last Sunday. And then earlier in the week did not go nearly as well because I was on him heavier and he was more owned. Oopsie involved in that. But yeah, we're on a 6-gamer here. It's hard to really neglect what those Ks can be. Of course, they added Matt Carpenter into the mix, but Matt Carpenter Ks a bunch against everybody. So I'm not as concerned having him be the lefty in there. He can create some issues. He actually probably made the best play of that game yesterday against Atlanta with the double steal that he pulled off. And, I was cheering my St. Louis stack that I had in the queue. I was trying to get that thing through and didn't even have any shot because Tommy Edman is terrible at baseball. Hate that human being. But on the other side, Wade LeBlanc, are we going to do anything with him considering 14% K percentage just looks unpalatable?
Yeah, it seems pretty tough to get to LeBlanc. The Braves, we've mentioned it before, but their lineup is just really, really good with these additions they made at the deadline with Soler and Adam Duvall coming over. Wade LeBlanc's cheap, but just another one of these guys that doesn't get strikeouts. For the season, he has a 13.7% strikeout percentage, just slightly higher than Daniel Lynch's 13%. He has a 5.59 xFIP. 0.92 home runs per 9 is kind of like the only thing you can point to for LeBlanc that he's done well. But I think there's a pretty good chance that number increases against this Braves lineup. So far this year, he's held righties to a 173 expected ISO. But if you go back to the start of the 2019 season, get a little bit bigger sample, 206 expected ISO against righties for LeBlanc. Still not much in the way of strikeouts. And you just have so much power with Albies, Soler, Riley, Swanson, Duvall. Lefties with like Freeman and Peterson still have power, especially Freeman, can hit anyone. So I think Atlanta is in a good spot against LeBlanc. I'm not looking to go to LeBlanc. I don't think Atlanta is getting enough ownership for that to really be a path that I go. Like if I'm going to take a bad pitcher that I don't think is going to do well, I would rather it be against a team that everyone else is rostering. So at least if I get lucky and they do well, I'm getting some leverage on the field. Atlanta looks like they're getting the ownership they deserve. So I'm probably not going to be one of the teams that I'm drastically overweight on, but I do like mixing these guys in as one-offs. Like Jorge Soler should get a ton of ownership, but is in a very good spot at 3,300. Swanson at 4,200, Duvall at 4,100. Just pretty favorable pricing on those guys in particular.
Is this better for you, Dwayne Lopez? Do you like this more? Is this a better look on me? The Bubba Watson? Just like the straight up Bubba Watson. He said that I feel like you're more professional if you button your shirt. Maybe I want some chest hair out there for the people to see. I don't know. But yeah, the Bubba looked, I look like a little schoolboy. I don't really like this very much. We're going to go back to what we were at before. Again, just whatever. Going to Atlanta on this side of it, as you said, Jorge Soler, Freeman, love that. On the St. Louis side, where are we kind of really targeting Tuki with? Is there a specific, the lefties, Dylan Carlson, Matt Carpenter, that's not my favorite 2 lefties to be getting to in the entire world. There's some righties outside of Goldie and Arenado that might stick out for us.
Yeah, I think with Tuki, it's kind of tough because if he's on, he's just probably going to strike out a lot of guys and pitch pretty well. And if he's off, you're just going to get like a carousel of base runners for St. Louis, and it's going to be a good spot for everybody. So it's one of those where, like, if I'm hand building, I'm probably leaning more towards either just like having 5 Cardinals or not having the Cardinals. But in 150 max, you can't. It's pretty tough to take the time to do something like that. So I think individually, I do really like that 3K salary on Dylan Carlson. Gives you some stolen base upside, gives you some power. Tyler O'Neill has plenty of power at 3,300. Matt Carpenter used to have plenty of power. He's 2K now. So, 2K is never a bad thing, I guess. But Dylan Carlson at 3K, I think, is the one that stands out the most to me.
And Atlanta side, kind of a little bit of everybody.
Yeah, I mean, Soler's, I think, the most egregiously priced at 3,300. But I do think there's some value on Duvall and Swanson as well.
Put Austin Riley in the Jack Mayfield bucket of somebody who homers every slate, but he's actually good and actually does homer, I think, every single slate. That does it for us. 6 gamer. Any final words for the people as we get out of here? Actually, we do have one super chat I want to touch on very quickly. You are the cash game aficionado. DK Cash. Sam Van Dam asks, thank you so much for the super chat, by the way. Is it better to punt pitcher and go heavy on bats, other way around, or does it heavily depend on the slate?
Heavily depends on the slate, but as a general rule in cash, you'll spend more on pitching because it's more projectable and, for lack of a better word, safer, to pay up for those guys. And then you can usually find value at hitting. On a lot of slates, it's pretty tough to find value pitching that you actually feel good about. Like, you can find it for tournaments where you're saying, oh, this guy has upside if he happens to pitch better than I think he's going to, but it's harder to get to those guys for cash. It does, entirely depend on the slate though. Like, if you have a core slate where everybody's 5,500 and there's like a 7K pitcher in a good spot, it's going to make sense to pay down at SP2 and get those bats in your lineup. But overall, you're typically going to end up with spending more money on pitching.
Awesome stuff, Adam. Per usual, my guy. Thank you so much for everything today. And again, we've got Live Before Lock coming up right after us here with Greg and Terry. And then the Hall of Fame game show that I'm going to be doing with Matt Gajewski coming up this evening, starting at 7:15 p.m. Eastern time. Check that out as well. Leading you up to lock of the Cowboys and Steelers. He's Adam Scherer, one of the best players. I'm Eric Lindquist. I'm an okay player. Have a great day.
Awesemo, MLB Live Before Lock for really an exciting night. Not just because we have a dearth of terrific starting pitchers to talk about, but football's back. We've got a little NFL preseason action. It's called the Hall of Fame game. Terry, you dipping into the NFL waters today?
I don't have any DFS lineups in. If there's any openings after the show or anything like that, I'm not even sure what time the game starts, honestly. So if there's anything there, I might jump in. I'll definitely have it on the TV. I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing, but it'll be on the TV alongside probably a Yankee game or something. But yeah, I'll be flipping to it at least. Good to have football back for sure. It's going to be a fun season.
I'll tell you when it's going to be on tonight. It is going to be on tonight at 8 o'clock. We're going to be doing some content for it after the MLB Live Before Lock. Not only that, but there's also free projections for it over on Awesemo.com today. So if you guys are looking at the NFL preseason slate like myself and have no clue what's going to be going on from a fantasy angle, we've got projections up on the site. So it's a good way to get some lineups in there. And they're going to be paid, I think, next week. But at least for now, first week of NFL preseason action, free projections over at Awesemo.com. But even more exciting is talking about some of these pitchers tonight, Terry, because another thing that I really don't know what to expect from is the pitchers today. So we've got Sonny Gray, who I guess is kind of the de facto best starting pitcher on the slate, neighbor Framber Valdez. But let's start right here at the top. Of those two pitchers, which of them do you feel better about today?
Jeez. I think, in a vacuum, as far as ownership goes and cost and all of that goes, it's got to be Sonny. He's got the better matchup going against the Pirates, even though there's more strikeouts in the Twins lineup and Framber's excellent at limiting power going the other way. I just think that there's just more quality in that Twins lineup. So I think Sonny's the safer bet, but everybody and their brother is going to be rostering him today. So you're going to be walking down the path with the entire field if you're going to Sonny Gray, particularly on the one pitcher site, two pitcher site, same story. So I think there's ownership offset in going to Framber, but I like getting to some of these other starters too. I mean, it's kind of a mixed bag type day. On a day when Sonny Gray and Framber are your clear cut top two guys by talent, that means it's a day that you can spread out to me. That means there's a lot of different possible outcomes here. So yeah, those are the top two guys on my board. They project that way. I would lean towards Sonny just based on the overall matchup, the weakness of that Pirates offense, despite the lack of strikeout upside.
Yeah, on DK, I'm getting to a lot of both just kind of by default because you start to build on it. It's like, do I really want to roster a bunch of like Daniel Lynch or Nestor Cortez or Ross Stripling or any of those guys? And, ultimately the answer is not really for me. Based on your reaction, maybe you feel a little bit differently, but I understand that in our top pitchers too, we do have Sonny Gray going a little bit over owned. We've got Framber Valdez also going a little bit over owned. If I had to pick one of them on FanDuel, once again, I do think that it's reasonable to expect a higher projection from Sonny Gray and a little bit more safety there. For tournament purposes, we have Framber Valdez projected for about half the ownership of Sonny Gray on FanDuel. So as a tournament option, I like Valdez a little bit better on FanDuel. DK, I'm getting to a ton of both. And I'm sure there's an ownership cutoff where if Sonny Gray and Framber Valdez were projected for like 70% ownership, I'd be, way under on them. But as of right now, 35% Framber Valdez, 54% Sonny Gray. I'm about even with the field on Sonny Gray, and I'm over on Valdez at the moment.
What I think is interesting on the DK board is that Framber's not the number two by probability of being a top two starter. That's kind of interesting that we have Stripling and Nestor Cortez sneaking ahead of him slightly in that percentage of being a top two pitcher. And that creates a situation where since he's only like 23% in that category, his 35% ownership is a little bit top heavy compared to those two guys who are going off at like level ownership. Framber's a much better pitcher than either of those guys. I trust the spot a lot more. I don't have the same projection or the same confidence in Nestor Cortez as a Yankee fan and in my my DFS model here as the site clearly does. So I'll trust the boss and I'll go with that one and I'll have him in some of my lineups. But that surprised me a little bit seeing Nestor in that spot there and the fact that he's up above Framber Valdez, up above Tuki Tucson in that slate. Both of those guys getting a lot more ownership.
Yeah, so talking about Nestor Cortez, and for FanDuel, I think it's very difficult to get to him just because he's not going to work deep enough in the game, in my opinion, to ultimately be able to get the quality start bonus, even getting through 5 innings. He might not even be able to get the win bonus. So over on DK, he's in my player pool kind of by necessity because we have to roster 2 pitchers. There's only so many guys to like today. Unless I'm going to 100% Framber Valdez and Sonny Gray, I have to roster some of these other guys that is considered crappy pitchers. And while Cortez has been okay this year, like I just mentioned, the real concern is how deep he's going to work into the game. So I'm a little bit underweight to the field on him. He's in my player pool kind of because I feel like he has to be. But how deep do you expect Cortez to work into the game today?
I would be surprised if we got anything beyond 5 innings. And I'd be honestly, if he gets to that level, I think we're taking it, we're running with it. I've got him projecting in my model the way that it comes together a little bit under 5 innings. So it's creating a lower projection than what Alex had for him. If I give him 5, he comes out around where Alex has him. And for 5,500 on FanDuel, that's where it gets at least interesting because you can put him in your lineup and then put any bats that you want. That buys you a full bat, buys you a major upgrade in your stacks. That's why he's getting like 15% ownership on the FanDuel slate. I'm just not totally comfortable with it. 30.5% strikeout rate over 32 and 2/3 innings, kind of out of nowhere. That's not the pitcher he's been throughout his career. 3.8% barrel ball rate is very good. 32.1% hard hit is very good. 21.5 degree average launch angle concerns me a little bit pitching in Yankee Stadium. That's just if you get a fly ball, it's a stadium where, that's the one park where that ball wouldn't have been out of any other park. Guys just hit little pop-ups that carry and go out of that stadium. So there's a little concern with the average launch angle there. And there's a concern around the fact that Seattle, for all their flaws, they are at a 4.17% home run rate against left-handed pitching, which is 7th best in baseball. So they do have the ability to hit the ball out of the park against lefties. They've got a 168 collective ISO that's around league average. They create runs 8% worse than average. And they've got a second worst in the league, 26.8% strikeout rate against lefties. So I can see where some of the projections coming from, but I just get a little worried about kind of a guy who's not really a major league level pitcher for the most part, and pitching in this situation, in this ballpark, it concerns me when we start getting to like 15% ownership on this kind of a slate.
Yeah. And the other thing too with Nestor Cortes is I understand he went 5 innings last start, but look at his starts before. It was the only time he's gone 5 innings the entire year. Because generally he's been a guy who hasn't been super efficient with his pitch count and then also doesn't get to throw many pitches. So last time out, he threw a season high 79 pitches. So I think a lot of people might look at that and say, like, okay, that's a trend in the positive direction. Maybe, or maybe it was just a one-off. Because if you look at his starts before then, he went 59 pitches, 74. So after the 59 to the 74, I think, you could reasonably say, all right, Cortez's pitches are on the way up. But he only threw 35 pitches in his next outing before getting up to 79. So I don't feel good about how deep he's going to work into the game. Like I said, I kind of feel like you have to get to him at his price point on DK, just because if you're not getting to him, like you're just ultimately playing probably like 100% Framber Valdez, Sonny Gray. A lot of these guys are not great plays just on a points per dollar basis, and certainly not the kind of pitchers we usually get. So I understand why people are rostering Cortes, but my actual preference is to stack the Mariners against him today. But let's talk about.
And just real quick on that note, just before we continue, I just did a real quick scan of his game log through his career. So if I missed one, I apologize. But it looks to me like that 5 inning start the last time out was only the second time back to 2018 in his entire career that he pitched 5 innings. And that previous time was in a bullpen start. So, I mean, it's just, it is not likely that we get 5 innings even out of him here. So I'm skeptical about the spot.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, something that I always say that I like to lean on a little bit. You said it's part of your model. For the rest of the year, Steamer does project Nestor Cortes to have a 4.41 ERA, and that is with the expectation he's going to be a reliever for most of the innings. And then you start to extrapolate those innings out as a starter, because it's much easier to find success as a reliever than a starter. And then you start to have a guy who's probably projected to have somewhere in the neighborhood of a 5 or so ERA as a starter, which is in line with what his career numbers are. I understand this year he's been better in 32 innings. Over the course of his career, Nestor Cortes 5.32 ERA, 5.37 FIP. He has not been somebody who's particularly effective. So as long as he's going to be popular today, I'm going to be underweight to him. I'm going to make some Seattle stacks. If he works deep into the game, so be it. I'm wrong, but that's not what I think is the most likely scenario. But walk me through, we just talked about a pitcher who's fairly popular that maybe we don't like quite as much as the field does. Another guy who's picking up some ownership today. What do you make of Tuki Tucson, who really struggled his last time out, but seemed to reinvent himself, went a little heavier with the sinker in his 2 starts before that, and found much better success in those couple of outings than did at earlier points in his career?
Yeah, Eric was talking about the pitch mix with Adam a little bit on the last show, and they went into it a little bit in detail. And it's made him a more effective pitcher at the major league level, at least on first looks. We'll see if it holds up. We'll see if it's something, but it's a different look, different than what's in the book on him. So it was effective to start. For the year, 17 innings over 3 starts, 28.2% strikeout rate, 5.6% walks, 13.7% induced swinging strikes. Very, very good marks there. Concerns around the barrel ball rate, the hard hit rate still, even with the quality, 51.1% hard hit, ouch. 8.9% barrel ball rate is pretty rough. 95.7 mile an hour average exit velo. Now he's saved a little bit by a 4.4 degree average launch angle. So he's keeping the ball on the ground, keeping it on a line, not giving up home run trajectory, but going up against a team that's at least relatively designed to hit home runs and has several guys that have the home run shape to their swing and kind of shoot for the moon that way. It's a little bit concerning, the hard hit and the launch and the barrel ball rates there. So I'd be a little bit hesitant throwing him up against this Cardinals lineup, but I think there are enough strikeouts here. I think he's priced appropriately. He's not crazy owned on the FanDuel slate at 8,500. So I think you can get away with him there. at 32 and change percent, because he's cheaper at 7,400 on DK, you're starting to walk into a territory where I think there are other ways to go. I would want some Tuki, but I think I would want to be below the field because he'd just be one of the more popular pitchers. I don't have the leverage number in front of me, but I imagine that's pulling him into negative leverage territory on that slate. As I'm pulling it up, yeah, so he's one of the more negatively leveraged starters on that slate. And like I was saying with Framber, we've got a couple guys that rank out ahead of him now that are getting equal ownership to their probability of success. So for me, he'd be more of a mix and match on the DK slate, trying to shoot for under the field, where I think I could get over the field on the FanDuel slate easy enough because they're under 10%. And I do think there's at least upside in the spot. I think you can find some strikeouts, maybe get through cleanly here.
So there's only one more chalk pitcher that we have to talk about for today, and that is Ross Stripling. He's picking up 10.6% projected ownership on FanDuel. Over on DK, we're expecting for 24.5% projected ownership. We also have him on DK with the second best chance to be a top scoring pitcher on the slate. So we actually have Sonny Gray 1, Ross Stripling 2, Nestor Cortes coming in 3rd in our projections, Framber Valdez down at 4th. But Ross Stripling, another guy in the same vein as Nestor Cortes, I just don't know how deep he's going to work into the game. I like the matchup against Cleveland a whole bunch because Cleveland traded away some guys at the trade deadline. It was already an offense that was kind of sputtering this year. So I think it's a good matchup for Stripling, but 8,800 on DK is a little bit prohibitive. He's also, somewhat popular. 8,000 on FanDuel, also somewhat popular. So once again, Stripling's in my player pool, but of these guys in this range, my preference is to come a little bit overweight to the field on Framber Valdez and then come underweight on guys like Stripling, Cortes. But what do you make of Stripling?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm happy to come in on a little heavier on the guys that I just know are talented pitchers, right? I know that Framber and Sonny Gray are talented guys. Whether they have it tonight, whether it works out, we'll see. But just going into it ahead of time, I'm happy to bank on the talent that I know is there and just avoid guys that I think are not the greatest pitchers. And Ross Stripling, he's fine. He's a league average kind of a guy. He pitches in and out of a bullpen in a hybrid role sometimes. This season, he's made a bunch of starts. He's given us 5 and change innings a couple times into the 6-inning territory. 85 and a third over 17 starts is kind of depth. It's not totally reliable to get to the win bonus, not totally reliable to get to the quality start. I do like the spot for his offense going against Tristan Mckenzie here. I think there's upside for the win here if he can get through 5 innings. 23.5% strikeout rate, nothing really special, 10% induced swinging strikes. Below average CSW percentage at 26.5 is a little bit of a concern. Probably walks a few too many, lets a few too many on base, 1.27 whip. He's got a 4.43 xFIP. Where I get even more concerned is the 10.9% barrel ball rate, 41.9% hard hit rate, 90.4 mile an hour average exit velo. Those are plus contact metrics, and he's got a 17-degree average launch angle allowed. So he profiles pretty well for home run upside. This is a home run park playing back in Toronto now. There are still several home run hitters in that Indians lineup, although no Jose Ramirez for the Guardians today. So that kind of sucks. I had a little stack that I like with a 3-man with Franmil, Bobby Bradley, and Jose Ramirez. Still get very nice home run marks on Franmil and Bobby Bradley, but that's a diminished version of that lineup. I don't know that it contributes to his major upside, although there are a lot of strikeouts in there now. So he's kind of a middle-of-the-road play for me. He's exactly in the middle of my board. I would take a few shares of him, but I think I'd be under the field on both sides on him.
Yeah, it's with Ross Stripling, once again, it's just an issue of pitch count where I'll bring up his pitch count numbers recently, and they're pretty similar looking to Nestor Cortes. Cortes has not gone over 80 pitches once the entire season. Ross Stripling, his recent outings, 76 pitches, 79, 36, 73. He was working deeper into games earlier in the year, but it's been a little while since we've seen that from him now. So once again, that becomes a concern for me. He's in my player pool once again by default, but I don't feel great about it because he's 8,800 on DK and picking up ownership. He's 8,000 on FanDuel. What I am also doing is I'm getting overweight on pitching now, other than being pretty heavy on Sonny Gray, although about even the field, I said I'm over on Framber Valdez right now. I'm dumpster diving some of these crappy starting pitchers who, and maybe it isn't even dumpster diving. Like Tristan Mckenzie is fairly expensive today, but he has strikeout upside and he's only projected for 3% ownership. There are a bunch of guys in this kind of cheaper price range that are picking up single digit ownership that I'm closer to like 10 to 15% on and just kind of mixing and matching. Are you doing something similar today?
Yeah, I set the Gray ownership and the Valdez ownership, I think, slightly ahead of the field in Fantasy Cruncher. Might even have gone a little bit below because I just run more lineups than I need, so it'll catch up. And then everybody else I was giving, little shares that were above the single-digit ownership that the field has, basically doubling it for all of them. and I'll take what I get and then I'll throw it into the filtering system and it'll come out where most of those guys come out above the field. I might not get to some of them. Like if I don't have any Griffin Jacks, I'll be totally fine with that. People in the chat were talking about him earlier and saying that he was pitching well. I disagree. 19% strikeout rate over his minimal amount of innings. So he's not really on my board, but a guy like McKenzie, absolutely 28.5% strikeout rate over 63 in the third innings, 6,400 on the FanDuel slate. I think he's very much in play. There's upside there. 8,400 on DK makes him a little bit more difficult to get to, but I think on a mix and match messy kind of a pitching day like this, yeah, that's a play in single digit ownership. That could be a major differentiator, major difference maker for you if he finds a few additional strikeouts in this stingy Blue Jays lineup. The confirmed lineup, 19.8% average strikeout rate is fantastic. And we know the upside of that lineup. They're a very, very good, powerful lineup, but he's a talented kid. He's an upside prospect. He's a kid that they hold in very high regard, and he's done it a few times. So the profile's there for him to give up a ton of runs here. He's got a 16.2% walk rate in addition to that strikeout rate, 12.5% barrel balls, 48% hard hit rate. So that's ugly in terms of run creation, contact profile. It's kind of a both sides. I would have a lot of Blue Jays, and I would mix in a fair amount of Tristan Mckenzie.
Yeah, I'm overweight to both sides. So Tristan Mckenzie, and also I've been overweight to the Blue Jays. I don't even know how many. Almost every slate they've been on over the last 2 weeks. The Blue Jays end up being one of my most stacked offense. Today's no different. I think it's a great spot for the Blue Jays. I like the spot for McKenzie too, relative to his ownership. Obviously, the matchup is brutal, but we have a guy with strikeout upside who's going unowned on a slate where the pitching options all suck. Like we're talking about rostering guys like Ross Stripling, Nestor Cortez, who might only pitch 4 or 5 innings today. Tristan Mckenzie has considerably more upside. The downside from him is also ridiculously low as well. But here are Tristan McKenzie's last handful of starts. 19 fantasy points, 18, -3, 33, -1, 18, -3. Very wide range of outcomes. When you have a guy like this at 3% ownership on a small slate where the pitching options are already bad, I want to have more than 3% of them. I'm not going and putting Tristan Mckenzie in like 20% of my lineups or anything, but I have him, probably going to end up around 10 to 15%, like I said before. And that's something I feel good about capturing the upside on this slate. And then referencing our top pitchers tool, we have Tristan Mckenzie. Once again, only 3% projected ownership. We actually do it with a 14.7% chance to be one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate. So that kind of data would indicate that he's someone to be overweight to the field on. But talk to me about some of these other pitchers who none of us feel good about. Obviously, we don't feel good about the popular pitchers. But which of the other guys that aren't picking up ownership are you trying to get overweight to in a big way?
Trying is more, it's going to be more happenstance, just, through the process, which ones of these guys I end up on. A guy that I expect will creep his way into some of my lineups just based on he's in the middle of my projections because some of these guys are bad. He's projecting out right about where he normally does in the mid-20s on a FanDuel point perspective. Only 7,000, one of the more likely options to give us a little bit of depth, maybe get to a quality start, maybe get to a win, and that might be all that matters. A guy who doesn't strike anybody out. Can you guess who I'm talking about? It's Dallas Keuchel, lefty going up against the Kansas City Royals. Plenty of strikeouts available in that KC lineup, 22.2% average on the up and down the lineup. But on the back end of it, there's some extreme strikeout guys. Not too many lefties in the confirmed lineup, so it's going to be a right-handed heavy lineup. But he's a guy who typically in his career has been good keeping the ball on the ground, keeping the ball in the park. That hasn't really been the case this season. It's been a little bit bumpy for him, pitching to a 4.44 xFIP, a 1.35 WHIP, giving up 10.1% barrel ball rate, -2.7 in my contact and run creation metric. It is not a good spot. It's Dallas Keuchel. He strikes out 14.6% of hitters. He's not going to create a ton of upside, but what he can give us, I think, is a 6-7 inning start, maybe a win, maybe a quality start, 4 or 5 strikeouts, and just get through somewhat clean. And I think on this slate, that might be enough. So I might get to some Dallas Keuchel. He's under 5% ownership on FanDuel, under 10% on DK. This is one of the weird oddball slates where I think he's in play. So I would get to him. I think all of these different guys, like if you wanted to try and talk about Daniel Lynch on the other side of this one, you could make an argument for him going up against this White Sox lineup. I wouldn't want to do it, but just based on the fact that he's going to be pitching today, I think there are arguments to be made for some of these guys. He could pitch his way into a 20-point start on FanDuel, and that might be enough. So it's just that kind of slate. Now, that's not the guy that I want to go to. I just wanted to make an example there. But I think, yeah, the main focuses for me are going to be Keuchel, going to be Tristan Mckenzie on that back end. I don't think I want any Tyler Anderson against the Yankees in that ballpark. I don't think I want to get to Will Crow against that Cincinnati lineup. So I'm just looking for some upside, I think.
Yeah. Well, to me, I mean, you just said you wouldn't want to go to Daniel Lynch. I don't want to go to Daniel Lynch either, but I'm rostering him. He's another guy that does come out looking pretty good in our pitchers tool. And if you look at his numbers this year, there's nothing good to say about Daniel Lynch. He sucked. He has a 6.95 ERA, 7.46 expected ERA. And then you look at his minor league numbers. You go, maybe his minor league numbers were better. No, not so fast. 5.84 ERA, 4.58 FIP in the minor leagues. But like you said, he's a cheap pitcher. He's on the slate. He isn't big up ownership. The one thing I could look to that makes me feel okay about rostering Daniel Lynch, but where I don't mind that I have him more than the field does. He's a very well-regarded prospect. Mm-hmm. He was the 77th ranked prospect in FanDuel coming into the season. If you look at his stuff and his velocity numbers, that all looks pretty good. 94.5 average fastball velocity so far this year. So I do think there's talent there. And once again, this isn't a guy who I'm getting to a ton of. I have him in 12% of my lineups right now, but that's more than the field. I don't mind taking stabs on him. The two low-owned guys that I think have some maybe hidden upside that have single-digit ownership right now, I mentioned them. It's Tristan Mckenzie. It's Daniel Lynch. I feel good about none of them. I know that it's going to be a thing where people will tweet at me later when it goes poorly. This guy sucks. I agree with you. They both suck. But you know who else sucks? Every other pitcher today. So there's nothing I feel good about today. It's cross your fingers, click some buttons, and hope you get the right guy. But I mean, Framber Valdez and Sonny Gray, if you want to be really risk adverse, build as many lineups for them as possible. They are the safest guys. But for tournaments, I'm also trying to roster some other guys, a pitcher.
Yeah, you don't only want the safe stuff in that in a tournament sense. So yeah, if you're playing cash, go with safety. If you want to just walk yourself into maybe min cashing a whole bunch of lineups, then yeah, make a whole bunch of Sonny Gray and Framber Valdez lineups and cross your fingers that A, none of these guys go off, and B, those guys don't get lit up. But you're going to be walking down the path with the entire field there. And then just to put in perspective, the conversation about Daniel Lynch, because you're right, that is where the upside for Lynch comes from, is from the talent that we know is in his arm, the talent that the scouts have seen, the talent that he's profiled to. A guy like Griffin Jacks, on the other hand, you mentioned Lynch is a top 70 or top 100, let's say, prospect, 70 some odd. Griffin Jacks is the 36th prospect in the Twins organization. He is a non-prospect. He's 26 years old. So there's a very big difference between going to a guy like Lynch, who does have good pedigree, and a guy like Jacks, who is just kind of a career minor leaguer who has never been good in the minor leagues. I'm looking at his minor league track record, 14.3% strikeout rate in AAA in 2019. He's at 22.1% this year, if you want to squeeze anything out of that, but 19% in the majors. Going back to AA, 18.6, high A, 17.9. He's just not a high-end guy. So there are guys who are just filler, and then there are guys who do have the potential to eventually create upside. They do have talent. We do expect them to become better, and Lynch is very firmly one of those guys based on his profile, based on his stuff and everything that you mentioned. So it's just important, I think, to call out those differences between these guys that you might never heard of either of them, but they do profile differently in terms of who they are, and that's why they project a little bit differently on our board.
Yeah, we've got kind of an interesting question here from Butthole Jenkins, where he's saying any relief pitchers catching our eye tonight. For me, no. It's something I do very infrequently, but I won't say never on a 2 or 3 game slate if I'm playing. For a slate of this size, I still don't think it's all that likely that we see a relief pitcher in the optimal lineup. The reason being is even though all these pitchers suck, it's not like all of them are going to score negative fantasy points. Of the 12 pitchers on the slate, we're going to manage to find, even if they luck into it, we might get, a contact game where one of these guys pitches 6 innings, gives up 2 runs, and only strikes out 3 guys, and they're able to put up, 11 fantasy points in a win as a cheap pitcher. That could be enough to make an optimal lineup. The issue with getting into some of these relief pitchers is you just don't know which of them are going to enter the game. Even if they get in, are they only going to pitch 1 inning? So to me, that is a no-go. But do you feel any differently, Terry?
No, yeah. For me, that's only a small slate kind of a thing. Same kind of a thing as an idea that somebody asked me about before we got on the air of just rostering hitters against your pitcher. For me, that's a 2 or 3 game slate only kind of a thing. And even then, I still feel dirty about doing it. And it's kind of similar with relief pitchers because, yeah, you're just flat out guessing it. All right, I think this is the guy that's going to get the action based on these guys have pitched the last few days. He hasn't. But then sometimes you're going to the 3rd or 4th best reliever in the pen. It gets really shaky. So it's not something I really like to do unless there's an announcement of, all right, this guy's going to get 2 innings, and then we're going to a bullpen game. We expect this guy specifically to be the bulk reliever. If you got an indication like that a guy out of the pen is going to get 3 or 4 innings and you're on a 2 or 3 game slate, then maybe. But yeah, otherwise, no.
All right, my stupid lineups are uploaded. I'm ready to spit on my computer now. This is terrible just looking at these lineups, but hey, it is what it is. I'm doing the best I can with the options here. It's not like I could manifest Yeah, I can't manifest Jacob deGrom to pitch on the slate. So I feel like we've walked, at least for me, I've walked through all the pitchers that I have any kind of exposure that I care about. Anybody else that's making it into your player pool, whether it be Will Crow, Wade LeBlanc, any of those guys.
But now that you at least said the name, I think we've covered every single pitcher because I don't think we had mentioned Wade LeBlanc's name. But yeah, neither one of those guys really interests me. LeBlanc's coming up at the bottom on my projections. Crow's right above him. So I don't really want to get to either of those guys. Don't think too much of them. And I think I'm going to be pretty heavy on the Atlanta offense today. So I don't expect to have either of them.
Yeah, this Cardinals old pitching rotation leaves quite a bit to be desired. Wade LeBlanc this year, who, by the way, is relative to the other crappy lefties they have on the team, like John Lester, J Happ. I guess that he rates out as a pretty good pitcher relative to the other guys on his roster, but still Wade LeBlanc this year, 4.17 ERA, 5.39 expected ERA. And the one thing that really hurts him from a fantasy standpoint, 14.4% K rate this year, only 12.6% last year. So hard to reasonably see a lot of upside in Wade LeBlanc. Maybe if he was 4K or something like that on DK, but he's not. He's priced up a little bit and he's more expensive than a handful of other pitchers on the slate. So to me, that is not something that I'm going to. But final question here, and this is going to be in the vein of our friend Boho Jenkins in the chat. Cut the crap. Who's your favorite overall pitching play on the slate? All things considered, which pitcher do you have the most exposure to right now?
Well, the answer to that question is Dallas Keuchel because he's the one in my placeholder lineup and I haven't put anything else in. I expect that the way that the ownership is falling, it will probably be Framber on the FanDuel slate. Let me just double check that again here.
It's Valdez for me on both sides.
Yeah, I think so. Just because Sonny's more overowned than he is. He's a little bit overowned based on if you're going purely by ownership versus top pitcher percentage. But he's the guy that's most reliable, most trustworthy, that's not getting the triple his probability ownership. He's only getting like a little less than double. So that would be my pick.
Yeah, that's right now I have Framber Valdez in 55% of my lineups. That's my most rostered player on the entire slate. It's a lot, but what are we going to do?
I think we agree more strikeout upside there for Framber, right? Going up against the Twins rather than Sonny against the Pirates there.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there's power upside in the Twins lineup, but there's also so many strikeouts in the lineup. They've got Miguel Sano in there and a whole bunch of other guys that strike out a lot. Power upside for sure, but a lot of guys that whiff when they're trying to hit home runs. So Framber Valdez, who has right now project for 35% ownership compared to 55% for Sonny Gray over on FanDuel. We've got Sonny Gray project for about double the ownership of Valdez. So I like him a little bit more, but either way, those are still my two most rostered pitchers. Last thing I'm going to ask you about Sonny Gray before we move on. Is Sonny Gray going to be your second most rostered pitcher today?
I'm only entering a handful of lineups. If I've put on a full slate, probably, although I don't know that that's necessarily true based on how the ownership impacts things. It might get carved down where he would be a little bit below the field's projection, which was in like the 30% range. So say I got to him in like the 22-ish, 20% range, that would be comfortable for me. And then I would distribute some of that to like Tuki, some of that to Dallas Keuchel, maybe a little bit to Ross Stripling, maybe a little bit to Tristan Mckenzie. That would probably be about the limits of my pool. A little bit maybe to Daniel Lynch. But again, that's rough on FanDuel. I don't know that I'd give any to Nestor despite the price on FanDuel. Like I said, I just don't trust it. And I think there's just too much ownership for a pitcher of his caliber. So I think that's probably how it would fall. Maybe Sonny would share some of his shares with some of the lower end guys so I could get above the field on them.
All right, so we'll move over to the offenses, but first, today's show is sponsored by Jock Market, and if you guys are looking for a different experience, a different way to play daily fantasy sports, head on over to Jock Market, where you're not building lineups, you don't have to worry about anything like ownership, although I'm seeing some people in the chat already saying they don't really care that much about ownership, but that aside, over at Jock Market, nobody has to worry about ownership because it's not something to consider. We're bidding on the players as if they are stocks, and then how they perform at the end of the night. You get a payout based on how they perform overall in terms of total fantasy points. If you don't like any of the crappy starting pitchers on today's slate, you don't have to worry about any of them at Jock Market. You can pick out some of your favorite hitters, place bids on them, and then buy and sell them after the slate has already started. So it's a really fun way to play the game. And then after somebody, maybe they strike out a couple of times, you think you're going to have more success later in the game, you could buy low on them. You could sell high on guys that get off to hot starts. If you're new to the site, head on over, use the promo code Awesemo when you make your first deposit, get up to a $50 deposit bonus. All right, let's get into the offenses now, which are a little bit more fun to talk about than the pitchers today, because if all the pitchers are bad, that means pretty much all the offenses are in good spots. So let's talk about these offenses. And right off the bat, Terry, which offense is the number one team that you have your eye on today?
So I really like the look of the Braves today. I wrote about them in my tournament strategy article this afternoon, which is free on the site. I just think it profiles for a really good spot. We were just talking about the flaws with Wade LeBlanc, whether or not he's the best of those lefties that they've got on that team now, which is just a ridiculous trio if you think about it. I just think he's creating a significant amount of run scoring probability here. There's a significant amount of just opportunity for the Braves to hit the ball out of the park, as well as create runs through sequential hitting. He's thrown 41 innings in 7 starts this season, 14.4% strikeout rate, 5.35 xFIP, 1.54 WHIP, walking 6.9%, 8.3% barrel ball rate, puts him at a negative 0.8 in the BBB minus K metric, which is looking for run creation opportunities and sequential hitting opportunities. 38.9% hard hit rate on top of that. Just a ton of power in the Braves lineup, up and down it. Even without, you took Acuna out of there, but they brought in Adam Duvall, they brought in Jock Peterson, they brought in Jorge Soler. Those are 3 titanic power hitters. Those guys have tremendous ability to hit the ball out of the yard. So this lineup is actually maybe better than it was for most of the season for power and for upside. They profile really well. They're not getting a ton of ownership on the FanDuel slate. They're getting a little bit more on DK, but I think they're still very playable over there. I like that lineup 1 through 7. And then you can take Kevin Smith if you want him as a catcher on DK for 2,100.
So we also just got a super chat that I see from our guy Sam Van Dam. I'll address that in a second. I see your super chat. Thanks for that. I like the Braves a whole bunch too. The first lineup that I built today by hand, which is usually something I like to do in the morning, just because I'm generally curious in the slate and I'll get bored. And before even if it's something that I'm not even going to ultimately be entering, I'm just like, all right, if I was playing a single entry lineup, what would I enter right now if the slate started? The slate started randomly 12 hours early. But first lineups I built today were with Braves stacks. I think the ownership on them is reasonable. They have as much upside as any team on the slate. And I like a lot of the power hitting from the right side against Wade LeBlanc today. Ozzie Albies, Austin Riley, Jorge Soler, Dansby Swanson. These are all guys I'm overweight to the field on. You mentioned Kevon Smith, not somebody I'd be interested in on FanDuel, but for DK purposes, you have a catcher with a little bit of hitting ability that's almost min price. That's always going to be an appealing option to me on DraftKings. Also only picking up 5% ownership right now. So the Braves are a very high priority stack for me today. And then also, there just isn't that much ownership going here, at least relative to what I think expectations should be. Single digit ownership for Adam Duvall at 5%. That seems a little crazy to me. And then, Ozzie Albies, Austin Riley, Jorge Soler. These are all guys with power upside against left-handed pitching that are all picking up ownership in the low teens relative to the size of the slate. The Braves, let's see, are they currently my most stacked team? They're close. They're up there. I have a few teams close to them, but yeah, the Braves are a very high priority for me today.
Yeah, for sure. And it's around those guys that you just mentioned. And just looking at some of the numbers, 6 out of the 8 hitters well over a 200 ISO, 5 out of the 8 hitters, and then 2 of them in the 180s, 6 out of the 8 hitters well over 100 in terms of run creation, WRC plus. And they go lefty righty pretty well. So even if they get into the bullpen later in the game, they've got a couple lefty power hitters in Freddie Freeman, Jock Peterson. We know typically for his career, much better against righties, much better for power against righties. This season, Jock's actually interesting. If you looked at his splits, he's actually got a decent triple slash against left-handed pitching. He's hitting 300 something, decent on base percentage, decent little slugging percentage, just and creating runs well above average. He's just not hitting for a ton of power against lefties. So it's interesting that they're giving him the opportunity to go lefty-lefty. He's focusing, I think, maybe a little bit more on contact. He's not getting any ownership down in the 7 spot in this lineup. 3,900 on DK, 2,900 on FanDuel, under 1% ownership or at 1% ownership on both sites. Even if you're just looking for like a one-off from this lineup, I think Jock could be a little bit sneaky there. So I like him. I like everybody above him. Dansby is a disrespected shortstop for his power upside, 20 home runs on the season, 218 ISO, 252, 306, 471 triple slash, 3% better than average creating runs. Maybe leaves a little to be desired in terms of the hit tool, but 8 stolen bases on top of the home runs. Just a lot to like in this lineup in terms of the ability to score points in different ways. Ozzie Albies up top, 17 homers, 13 stolen bases. They put points on the board.
Yeah, so I mean they're among my most rostered offenses. Love them for sure today. We do have a super chat here, like I said, from Sam Van Dam. He's saying, "Sorry, so many questions. Don't worry about it. Ask as many questions as you like. Also, it really helps with the flow of the show when we get questions on slates this size, because it helps to be able to talk about some stuff other than just the numerous pitching options that we hate today. So the questions about other topics also appreciated. So many questions lately. Sorry, once again, don't have to apologize. DK Cash, is it as important to stack in cash versus GPP? Can you do stack and then best projected one-offs? So for me, stacking in tournaments is a must. In cash games, and by the way, I don't generally play MLB cash games. I will if there's overlay in a contest, or every once in a while there'll be a slate that pops up where I want to. But for the most part, I just play tournaments in baseball. For tournaments, have to stack, and you don't have to for cash games. In most cases, it's ill-advised to, because if you think the reason that we're stacking in tournaments, it's to create as much upside as possible at the expense of floor. And what we're looking for in cash games is the opposite. We want as much floor as possible. Now, every slate could be different, where it could be one of those slates like we had on DK, and this is a DK specific question, where the other day the Rockies and the Cubs were playing at Coors Field and all of the players were mispriced. And in that sort of situation for a cash game, it makes a whole lot of sense to just play all those cheap guys that are going to pick up a bunch of ownership. So it's going to be different slate to slate, but in general, you want to pick out some of the best individual hitters that project the best for us over on our site, and then go with the highest floor pitchers. So today I'd start your cash line to go Framber Valdez, Sonny Gray at pitcher, and then you start to work in some of the other hitters that are projecting well on an individual basis. But no, you don't have to stack in cash games. Terry, what do you have to say about this?
What he said.
There we go. I'll take
I
that
don't
as a vote of confidence.
Yeah, I don't really play cash games for baseball either. It's just not my thing. It just doesn't really connect with my brain in the way that cash games for other sports do. But yeah, everything that you just said about the approach to it was 100% on point. That's exactly how I would do it too.
And also to address what's going on in the Giants game right now, I would typically be rooting for a team like the Giants in any other season. Because I like, whenever I don't have betting or rooting interest, I just root for the underdog as kind of a blind mindset. The reason that everybody in chat right now is rooting for the Giants and I prefer the Giants to lose is because I bet fairly heavily on the Dodgers when they traded for Trey Turner and Max Scherzer right at the trade deadline. They were minus 140 to win the division. I was like, hey, that's a bet that I really like. And the Giants just never lose games, and it's starting to really get on my nerves. So I would like them to not come back from down 4-0 in the ninth inning right now. That ran aside. Let's see Tyler Clipper close this game out, and let's get back into the offenses today.
There you go, D-backs.
Yeah. So other offenses, something that really stands out about the projected ownership today, the Cincinnati Reds clearly in a great spot today against Will Crow. Will Crow has been absolutely horrendous so far this year, but that's something that could be said about almost every other pitcher on the slate. So right now we have the Cincinnati Reds is going pretty over-owned on the slate on both FanDuel and DK. They're picking up a pretty substantial negative leverage score. I get that it's a great spot. I'm using some of these guys as one-offs, but as a 5-man stack, I'm underweight to the field on them. And I don't have an issue with going in some other directions because, like we've talked about, there's a bunch of bad pitchers on the slate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes sense. And anytime on a short slate like this, where we're going to see not only one team or two teams get a significant amount of the weight, creating opportunity on other teams, you also typically see what we're getting on today's board where, yes, Cincinnati, looking at the DK board, is up top, but it's only by like a percentage point, half a percentage point over the next highest team, a couple percentage points over the 5th ranked team, which is the Toronto Blue Jays. And once you go 2 or 3 spots down the board, you start picking up a lot of positive leverage. So a team like the Blue Jays, I would just happily pivot away from that Cincinnati ownership and start rostering Blue Jays who are pretty significantly under-owned for a similar probability of being the top team. We talked about the good spot there. So I agree. It's a fantastic spot for the Reds. The team that I've won with this season. It's a team that I like getting to. It's a spot that, Will Crow is a pitcher that I've attacked with worse offenses than this throughout this season. So I would love to be on them, but they're just too owned. And it's ownership that's around all of the players that I want to get to. Even Eugenio Suarez at the bottom of the lineup is getting 25% ownership in the 8th spot. That's a little bit difficult to justify. So I'm just happy to get away from not only very heavy ownership, but some weirdly shaped ownership as well.
Yeah, so I mean, this Reds team, they are currently projected to be the second most rostered team over on DraftKings. They're projected for a 17.8% ownership share. The most rostered team on DK is the Houston Astros at the moment. Over on FanDuel, we have the Reds with an 18% projected ownership share. That makes them the overall most popular team on the FanDuel slate. But some of these other teams, now let's talk about a team that I alluded to liking before, and also one that's going to look a little bit different, FanDuel versus DraftKings, but the Toronto Blue Jays, who once again are just not picking up enough ownership on DK. And the spot against Tristan Mckenzie was, as we highlighted him before, very high variance pitcher who's mixed in having some good outings this year with horrendous ones. I'm actually fairly confident that one side of this game is going to end up in a GPP winning lineup today, whether it's Tristan Mckenzie as a pitcher or either the Toronto Blue Jays as a stack or a couple of one-offs here that are going to home run. There's so much upside in this spot that I think it's kind of unavoidable. It's almost like one of those for anybody who plays MMA DFS. if there's a spot where it's like, hey, this is a 50-50 fight, one guy is -110, the other one's -110, but it's like -200 to finish inside the distance. It's like, this is a fight I want to target. That's how I feel about the Blue Jays versus McKenzie. Right now, the Blue Jays only project for 7.6% ownership. We have them as one of the teams more likely to be a top scoring team on the slate. So Blue Jays, a game that once again, I'm going to be prioritizing Blue Jays as a stack.
Yeah, me too. I think they look very, very strong here. They're an interesting team too. I mean, we know the quality up and down that lineup. They've got cheap Corey Dickerson in the middle of that lineup, hitting from the left side of the plate for quality and for power now. So it's just a good lineup from at least, I don't know, 1 through 7. And then you've got Santiago Espinal and Reese McGuire bringing up the back end of it. But 7 spots in this lineup going up against Tristan Mckenzie. 7 guys with decent contact profiles, pretty good power, run creation ability, some of whom draw walks pretty significantly. Vlad Guerrero's 13.2% walk rate, only a 16.8% strikeout rate, just a phenomenal hitter. Springer up top strikes out a lot more than that, but also walks 11.6% of the time. Semien walks 9% of the time, strikes out 22%. All these guys make significant amount of hard hit at the top of the lineup, significant barrel ball rates. So there are just very good indicators for them to create offense here. They're expensive. They're difficult to get to on both sites, but people are doing it. People are getting there to some degrees on the heavy, on the top end hitters. But then you immediately fall off the cliff in terms of ownership on DK with Corey Dickerson in the 5 spot pulling in less than 2% ownership for 3,200. That's a mistake. Lourdes Gurriel, Randall Grichuk, those guys have power. There are decent ways to string this offense together. So I like the spot. McKenzie behind the average in the BBB minus K. So with the 16.2% walk rate that I mentioned earlier, 12.5% barrel ball rate, 48% hard hit rate. So he gives up run creation opportunities and he gives up power. It's a great spot.
Yeah, it's high variance spot. And I know that people get a little annoyed sometimes, especially when we're on both sides of the game, but that's kind of the reality of MLB DFS. I'm overweight on McKenzie. I'm overweight on the Blue Jays. I don't really see a way around it just based on some of the outlook of this slate. But let's talk about the Houston Astros now, because we talked about how bad of a pitcher they're going up against in Jacks, a guy who totally unranked prospect in his organization, the Minnesota Twins. And from what we've seen of him so far this year, the numbers are horrific to say the least. So Griffin Jacks from Minnesota this year, 6.41 ERA. And you look at some of the contact numbers, everything's get hit in the air against him. He's a 29.3% ground ball rate. Generally, when you see guys that give up a lot of fly balls, they have a kind of suppressed home run to fly ball rate. Not Griffin Jacks, 15.9% home run to fly ball rate. 5-man stacks, we do have them going a little bit over-owned, but as one-offs, I'm getting to a whole bunch of Houston Astros because I think this is a team that's very likely to hit some homers today. So Michael Brantley, Kyle Tucker, Yordan Alvarez, these are all guys that are popping up in around 20% of my lineups. What are you doing with Houston?
Yeah, they're coming up a ton for me in Fantasy Cruncher. I'll be curious to see where they would come up. I'm going to drop them into my filtering tool, even though I'm running only a handful of lineups, just to see where things would shake out. I might end up a little bit under just based on some of these guys being in the 20s. Although Brantley in the just mid-teens, Aledmus Diaz, Kyle Tucker just in the mid-teens, I can get to some of those guys in combinations with the Altuves, the Yordan Alvarez's of the world. So there's a lot of upside. There's definitely home run upside. I've got 5 out of the top 6 hitters, well over 10 in my home run model, getting good DFS projections on them. So I'm happy to roster these Astros most of the time. I wish they were a little bit less owned. I wish Griffin Jacks was getting more of that mysterious respect that he was getting in our little chat there earlier. If that person's still in the YouTube chat, I don't want to call you to the carpet or anything. I just love to know what you were looking at when you said he's been pitching well lately. That is certainly not the case. So yeah, there's just major upside for the Astros here, getting a little bit of ownership, but if you can figure out unique ways to put them together, I love the spot.
Yeah, it's hard to see a way that they don't put up. I mean, obviously there's baseball, there's variance, but for me personally, it's hard to see a way they don't put up a few runs on the board. I view the Houston Astros as the safest offense of the team to put up runs on the slate against Griffin Jacks, just given his contact profile. And I mean, he's a 6.17 FIP this year. So it's not even like we could look at his numbers and say like, oh, 6.41 ERA has gotten massively unlucky. I mean, he's a 237 BABIP and he's an ERA over 6. And the amount of hard contact he's given, given up, it's all reasonable. So Griffin Jacks, I think this guy probably isn't long for the big leagues. 26 years old and shown subpar results right now. And it is what it is. I think the Houston Astros, they're popular. I'm getting to them anyway. I don't see a way around it, especially them as one-offs. let's do some home run picks, Terry. I'm pulling up the prop tool right now over on Awesemo.com. Mix it up a little bit, then we get back to some of these stacks. And if you guys have questions, fire those in, and we could answer them. So I'm pulling up the top stacks tool right now, top props tool, I mean. And I'm going to throw out some of the best bets that we have on the board right now, and we'll get your reaction to it, and then do some home run picks for us also, just based on your model, who you think is most likely to homer. Also, Terry does great articles for us over on the site that do a good job of highlighting some of the guys that he projects is most likely to hit a home run. We have Miguel Sano today, a 25% chance to homer. He is plus 400 odds to homer. That is a 23% expected ROI. So obviously the individual matchup for him against Framber Valdez is not great, but 4-1 odds for Miguel Sano to homer against the lefty, that's never really a bad spot.
That is one that I don't actually like all that much, to be honest.
Okay.
Framber allows a 42.9% hard hit rate, but he allows a negative 6.4 degree average launch angle, 4.4% barrel ball rate. He is difficult to hit a home run against. 71% ground ball rate on the season. Sano is the second highest guy on the Twins in my home run model, very, very close to Josh Donaldson. So those would be my two choices from that team. And if I was making this pick, I'd probably just go to Sano just because he's a little bit less owned, a little bit more fun to pick, a little bit cheaper. But I don't love that opportunity as far as a bet goes. So I think I might lay off that one. I don't like attacking Framber for home runs.
All right, so I'm going to try to find another one. What else projects well in our top props tool for hitters right now? By the way, this is free to use on the site. Terry was not enthusiastic about the Miguel Sano one, so I'm kind of trying to filter through some of the players also, just because there's a bunch of early games today. So I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, who's already played today? This guy. You want
to do it the other way around? I'll give you a couple guys who profile well in my model, and we can look at what the odds are.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
How's Franmil Reyes looking? He's number one in my home run model today.
What odds would you give him of homering? His odds are really bad.
Okay, so I don't really quantify it in terms of odds, but he's basically double the mark that I set that I call like an above average chance. He's at a 20, so that's what I call like an excellent chance. Going up against Ross Stripling, who is allowed 10.9% barrel ball rate with a 41.9% hard hit, 17 degree average launch angle, so the ball goes up, not down. I really like that spot. And like I said, the Indians, prior to Jose Ramirez coming out of the lineup, were one of the teams I was looking to target today just because of some of that power upside. So
our model has him with a 23% chance to homer, making him one of the most likely guys to homer today. Herein lies the issue. His sportsbook odds are plus 280, and there's almost never a time where somebody is a good bet at plus 280 to homer. So Franmil Reyes, I agree with you. I think he's one of the more likely players to homer on the slate. He just has really crappy odds, and that makes it hard to find value there. And that's also generally why a lot of these home run props, betting the yes on them, it's kind of hard to find value. And something that oftentimes there is value, even if they're longer odds, is the no. And one thing I point to is, Jordy Mercer was one that Alex had posted a bet on Twitter a couple of weeks ago that generated a lot of traction. People responded to. People are like, why would you bet on Jordy Mercer to not homer at minus 900? And then I started to look at our data on the site, and you start to break it down and go, whoa, well, Jordy Mercer, the fair odds from look like about minus 2,100. So there's actually a good amount of value on the minus 900 number there. But here's one other guy that I'll throw out for today that we have a decent chance of homering relative to what his odds are, and that is Salvador Perez, who is plus 330 to homer. That is a bet that we have a 10% expected ROI on. So Salvador Perez, how do you feel about him?
I'd imagine Sal's going to be profiling pretty well. He usually does. Let me jump to it here. Come on, Sally. He is leading his team at an 8.64 in my model, which puts him just below that average chance of hitting a home run. Another guy going up against Dallas Keuchel, who, like I said when we were talking about him, historically has been very good keeping the ball down, keeping the ball in the park. This season, the contact is up, 10.1% barrel ball rate, 39.8% hard hit rate, 5.5 degree average launch angle. So it's not going directly into the ground anymore, but it is still going out on a line. It's not creating the greatest home run trajectory. I like this one better than the one going up against Framber, but I think I would rank it behind the Franmil one, which was obvious because that's in my own model, and that was the way they ranked.
Yeah, and it's Salvador Perez. That is one of the only guys in here that are playing tonight that we actually have as a positive ROI bet. But now we can jump back into some of these stacks. I wanted to break it up a little bit here, and we did have some people asking about, actually, this was funny. Somebody asked, I want to give credit towards who it was. A Wise Will asked, what do we think of the Pale Sox? So referring to the White Sox as a stack today. Yeah, I like them going up against Daniel Lynch. I'm overweight to the field on Lynch, but that's also because he's projected for 4% ownership today. So I'm double the field on Daniel Lynch. I mean, he's 8% of my lineups as of right now, but still, Daniel Lynch has a pretty good background as a prospect. When we talked about him before, for people who weren't watching at the top of the show, he's a well-regarded prospect, is not led to results at the major league level, hasn't even led to results at the minor league level that are anything that we could really hang our hat on, but he has shown good stuff at times this year. 94.5 average fastball velocity. That's something that's letting me get to him double the field, but at the same time, there's tremendous downside of him, and I still think it's a good spot for the White Sox offense. 6.95 ERA, 7.46 expected ERA. So the two spots at pitcher that I'm really on both sides of, it is the White Sox against Daniel Lynch, and then it is the Blue Jays against Tristan Mckenzie. I'm on both the pitchers a little bit, but on both the offenses as well.
Yep, I think that makes sense. I was when I was hand building earlier in the day, the White Sox were one of the teams I was monkeying around with a little bit, and they fit well together with some of the other high-profile offenses too, just based on where their talent is. So it's a lineup that I like getting to in general. Timmy Anderson up top, Jose Abreu, Eloy back in the lineup now. You get Andrew Vaughan, who typically comes in pretty cheap so far. I don't think he's been much above 3 for most of the year on the FanDuel slate, despite a good amount of power, despite a very good prospect profile. Joan Moncada slipping to 6 in the lineup, switch hitter. Really like his profile on both sites. They're getting a little bit more ownership on FanDuel than on DK, so I think just site to site, I prefer it on the DK slate, but I think the spot is certainly very good for them going up against Lynch here. Like you said, everything we've talked about is profile based and speculation based on what he's actually done, what the numbers actually say. He is super targetable, one of the most targetable pitchers on the slate. We just think there's more to him than what we've seen so far. So yeah, that would be a spot I agree. I'd be getting to a little bit more Lynch than the field, and I'd be certainly rostering White Sox.
Yeah. By the way, I don't even know if there is more to him than we see from the field. I hate all of these pitchers, and he's cheap, and we have him with a better than 4% chance in our top pitchers tool. Like it's kind of So I'll look at the tools, right? And it'll say, all right, Daniel Lynch projects to be having a better chance of being a top pitcher than what his actual ownership is. And I'll look into it and I'll try to find a reason to try to justify it. I don't feel good about it at all. It's if we had Daniel Lynch in our model with a 4% chance to be a top pitcher of 4% ownership, then I wouldn't be on him. But I just look at it. It's like, all right, I get it. All the pitchers suck on the slate. He's kind of well regarded as a prospect. Whatever, he makes it into my player pool. I don't feel good about it by any means, but in terms of a lower owned offense, we've gone over some of the expensive stacks. Is there any team that's maybe cheaper and not picking up ownership that you were on today?
I think Seattle's somewhat interesting. Just anytime you're getting a decent home run hitting team going up against the hand that they hit home runs against, going up against a pitcher that we don't necessarily think all that much of in Yankee Stadium, I think there's certainly some home run upside at the very least for Seattle. So maybe if we're looking for some one-offs, we can look to them. But I think they are actually a reasonably stackable team going up against Nestor here, and they're not pulling any ownership on either site. They're very affordable. J.P. Crawford up top, Mitch Haniger, Ty France, Kyle Seager. That's a decent four-man right there off the top. I don't mind putting Abraham Toro into lineups, Luis Torrens into lineups. Tom Murphy has at least power upside. So if you're looking for a cheap DK catcher who's not getting any ownership, he's certainly viable. Jared Kelenic has done nothing at the major league level. He's another guy. He's kind of like the pitcher from the Royals. He's at a 128, 217, 221 triple slash, a .094 ISO, creating runs 79% worse than average in 166 plate appearances at the major league level. But this is a kid who has just had baseball in his blood for years. This is a kid who has just been a high profile prospect. He was somebody that they had to, extract with like dental tools out of the Met system in that trade a few years ago. So he's somebody they expect a lot from. For 2,300 on FanDuel, for 2,200 on DK, I'm happy to get to him. Dylan Moore's even interesting. Second base and outfield eligible, little bit of power, good amount of speed going up against Kyle Higashioka as a catcher there. He doesn't have the cannon that Gary does, so I don't mind rostering some speed here either.
Yeah, the Mariners are actually, I think them and the Blue Jays are the two offense I'm most overweight to relative to their ownership. And there's a couple of reasons why. First of all, the Mariners just look underowned as a stack today, which is always something that's going to have me overweight to a team. Then the other thing that compounds with it is I think Nestor Cortes is a little bit overowned. So Nestor Cortes is being a fairly popular pitcher, especially on DraftKings today, projected for, let's see, what is the most recent ownership run right now? We have 25% projected ownership to Nestor Cortes for a pitcher who's generally been bad for the most of his career. Even if he's been good this year, Nestor Cortez still 5.32 ERA, 5.37 FIP for the entirety of his career. He has pitched better this year, although we're also only looking at 32 innings that he's tossed so far. He doesn't have good stuff. He kind of relies on trickery, changing up his rotation and pitch speeds and whatnot. I think that Nestor Cortez could get hit hard. I don't really buy into his success so far this year. And given what his ownership is, I like the Mariners for a little bit of leverage as well. So I'm in the same boat as you. Seattle's a team that I'm overweight to the field on. I think it's definitely a team that makes a whole bunch of sense. So let's talk about any other stacks that we've not mentioned that you think that you think really warrant us talking about. If not, then we'll talk about some other props. We'll look at the top prop stool and bring out some strikeout props.
Yeah, I think we hit most of the major upside points on the slate. I never really mind rostering Royals stacks in the right spot. I don't know necessarily that this is the one for them. Going up against Kikel, who I mentioned I don't typically like to attack. But at least they would probably be next up in terms of which one of these offenses is most interesting to me. I would rather go after Kikel, I think, than go after Framber Valdez, despite the extreme ownership that you'd be attacking if you did decide to roster Twins against Framber, which would be the reasoning behind going to Twins, that and their home run upside. But again, he suppresses home runs very well. I think you can maybe get away with some sequential hitting, some stolen bases, and then maybe you pick off a home run and some run scoring with by going to Royals. It's just not a great version of this lineup, particularly when you get out after 4. You get into Emmanuel Rivera. Edward Olivares, I think, is a somewhat interesting young hitter, but he hasn't really done much. Michael A. Taylor, Cam Gallagher, Nicky Lopez, not that impressive on the back end here. You get a little bit of speed out of Nicky Lopez, 354 on base. So maybe you wrap him around to Whit Merrifield, Carlos Santana, Sal Perez, and Hunter Dozier up at the top and create a unique lineup. Not getting a ton of ownership, not a go-to for me, but at least, maybe you scratch something out with them. Like I said, they'd be my next team up, I think.
All right. You're going to be excited about this. The number one pitching prop bet of the day in our props model today is Daniel Lynch. Now, the number, it's over 3.5 strikeouts. So it's not like he hits the over and we were guaranteed a big fantasy game, but over 3.5 strikeouts for Daniel Lynch. He has not been a prolific strikeout guy over the course of his major league career, but once again, it's a small sample size. He also does have he has pretty good stuff, 94.5 average fastball velocity. The one thing that has been different about his minor league numbers compared to his major league numbers is he did generate strikeouts in the minor leagues. He was a guy, if you go back to the minors, this year, 24.1% K rate. Back to 2019 in rookie ball, he actually had a 36.4% K rate. So one thing I do think we could see some positive regression from with Daniel Lynch is the strikeout stuff. So over 3.5 strikeouts, it's a very low number. I'm sure if it was 4.5, it would be something that would lean towards the under in our model. But how do you like over 3.5 strikeouts for Daniel Lynch, who I have 8% of my lineups right now?
I'm actually getting there. I've got him a little bit over 4, so I'm with that bet. My model does it 2 ways. It creates an implied strikeout total based on his steamer projections and some other things, and then it creates a little bump one way or the other. So the implied is 3.2, but the actual is over 4, so I like it.
All right, there we go. Daniel Lynch. We are super confident he's going to strike out 4 guys today. Our model does have him striking out 4 more 79% of the time. So not a bad one to look at there. In terms of other pitchers, here's somebody else who we did not like as a pitching play today. And also the sports betting model projections didn't like him. So it stands to reason that our pitcher prop model isn't going to like him either. Wade LeBlanc, under 3.5 strikeouts, another low strikeout guy. His total 3.5. We have him hitting the under there 60% of the time. So Wade LeBlanc, before I talked about his strikeout rate and why that was a reason I'm not really on him at all today. Wade LeBlanc this year, he's having just a 14.4% K rate. Last year, 12.6% K rate. Real lack of swing and miss stuff from Wade LeBlanc at this point in his career. So under 3.5 strikeouts. How do you feel about another low pitcher prop? By the way, all the pitcher prop numbers are really low today because these guys are generally not good.
Yeah, I love that one. I've got him coming out in the projected, the actual at 2.5. So I've got him well under that. So fire away.
By the way, so plus money on the under 3.5. So that is also something nice about Wade LeBlanc. I'm going to go through his game log. Just what do you think is the most strikeouts Wade LeBlanc has had this year?
4.
Let's see.
You have more than that?
5. By the way,
5?
also, you want to know how crazy this 3.5 number is with plus money on the over? How many times this year do you think Wade LeBlanc has struck out 4 more hitters?
He hasn't made that many starts, right? Let's say 5.
1.
1? Oh,
yeah, and he's plus money to be under 3.5 strikeouts. So Yeah, that actually does seem like a pretty appealing bet there. But all right, we are nearing towards lock. If you guys have not done so already, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got all kinds of football content that's going to be coming up down the pipe because it's finally time for the NFL preseason. So any final thoughts you want to give the people before we get this slate locked in about 30 seconds, Terry?
Oh, enjoy your garbage pitching tonight, and good luck out there. Keep your fingers crossed. It's going to be a fun one. It's going to be a tight sweat for the entire night, particularly if Gray and Valdez get blown up. So it should be a fun one to watch.
More so than anything, a lot of times we say good luck at the end of shows, but today especially, good luck. We're going to need it.
Yeah, for sure.